Hi, good evening, everyone. Thank you for being here. My name is Clay Newton. I'm the chair of the Planning Commission. I'll be your host this evening. 900, over 1,000 pages of documents. So we've got a doozy in front of us tonight. We're going to try to move through as quickly as we can. But I do want to take a minute to explain some of the processes. There are some new faces out here that are maybe not familiar with some of what we're going to be doing tonight. And I want to make sure you have an understanding of this process. Tonight, we're listening. So the Planning Commission generally, if at code, the rules that the people of the city say and state say that we want applied to our community. And we're weighing that against individual rights in many cases. There are several requests tonight for setback reductions, a conditional use permit, and sometimes we'll hear variances. Those processes are held under a judicial process that we're very tightly regulated, serve as a judicial body. And make a decision as to whether or not the request will be approved or not. In that process tonight, if you are new to this, we have that quasi-judicial process. We'll ask for testimony from the applicant. The applicant can come up, make their presentation to us. Any representatives of the applicant can come up at that time, make their presentation on behalf of the applicant. Any proponents, I'll then call for testimony from the any proponents. And we'll wrap up by giving the applicant or the applicant's representatives the opportunity to respond to anything they've heard or adding any additional information that they feel should be added. They heard from a proponent or something they maybe forgot. In this process, anyone can ask for a continuance to the process. That means we extend it to our next meeting. We will grant that. The first time we have to grant it. The second time we may or may not grant it. We're bound by rules in terms of how quickly we have to rule on these requests, these cases. So we may not be able to grant a second request, but we will definitely grant a first. If you are making a presentation, when you, if you'd like to come forward, please raise your hand. I'll recognize you. Come forward at that time, state your full name and a mailing address, and then give us your testimony. Before we get into tonight's approval of the agenda, I want to thank my fellow commissioners. As I said, we have 1,000-page packet in front of us. It is the largest I've ever seen. I've been on this commission, I think, coming on 6 years. There are very important, tricky legal issues that take a lot of information. And so thank you to the people who are providing us that information so we can make educated decisions up here. Thank you to you for your patience time as we wade through this, because there are some lengthy, tricky sections we'll go through. But again, and I know even sitting here tonight, getting through the 900 pages of the tree committee, several of you have spent a lot of time on that, coming into years at this point. So thank you all very much. I really appreciate all that you have done. And that's you too, Aaron, out there. Shout out virtually. Okay, so let's get started. May I have an approval of our agenda this evening?
Motion to approve.
Second.
Any further discussion?
Is the agenda updated from the original packet, or is there a,
There are a couple of items.
because there was
one that pulled out.
the one that pulled out, is that still on that existing agenda?
Should not be unless,
Yeah, I think we still got it on.
It's on the collective packet,
Yeah,
which I would have to remove it, change it, so I left the packet as is, but the agenda on the page has been updated.
Okay. Yeah, that was my own comment.
and if we need to amend it, if everyone needs if there's a certain comfort level right now on your agenda, it's item number 5 that got withdrawn. So if anyone wants to amend it to indicate that 5 is withdrawn, we can do that too. It's just that with that 900 pages.
Yeah, so let me modify the motion. I move to approve subject to removal of item 5 from the agenda.
do I have a second?
Second.
Any discussion? We don't need to vote on that, do we? Let's take that off. Item 5 is removed.
And that was just the applicant requesting that withdrawal.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I'm looking at my number 5 and it's not aligning with our conversations. I just want to make sure that I'm not missing something here.
It
I
was,
think I printed, I have the most recent print.
Okay.
Okay. Okay, with that amendment, any further discussion on the agenda or We good? Okay, then let's move forward with that agenda. Moving on to consideration of the minutes from our last meeting, June 27th. Are there any amendments to those minutes? There's no amendments. May I have a motion to approve the minutes?
So moved?
Second, any discussion? Okay, Tessa, will you call the roll, please?
Commissioner Moritz,
Yes.
Commissioner Matusek,
Yes.
Commissioner Ostrander,
Yes.
Commissioner Bates.
Yes.
Commissioner Sinclair,
Yes.
Chair Newton.
Yes. That's our approved. Okay, we're going to move to the public comment section of our meeting. This is an opportunity for anyone in the audience or online board voice concerns that they have that are within the purview of the planning commission. This isn't a wide open, I don't like what my neighbor did to me yesterday or where they parked their car. This is, well, I guess where they parked their car could be a planning commission issue. You never know. I ask that you keep it to 3 minutes. As I said, we have a big meeting tonight, so if I can come forward with public testimony, please keep it to 3 minutes. We'll time that. I'll let you know when that 3 minutes is up. Mickey, would you mind timing?
Sure.
Is there anyone who has public comment that would like to come forward at this time? Please come forward. I saw your hand first.
Mary Beth Cottle, and my address is PO Box 492, Cannon Beach. I'm here to do my little relaxed speech for the trees and our environment. I know that you guys have a terrifically tough job balancing between use of the land by the owners and protecting the resources of Cannon Beach. And I appreciate what you are doing very much. I do want to encourage maximum protection of the trees. And also the wetlands, they go hand in hand. I work downtown and I oftentimes come home at lunch to let my pups out. And the difference between the temperature downtown, where there are no trees, and Spruce Park, a mile away, is 5 degrees on a hot day. And that is significant. And it creates a completely different climate in my little neighborhood of Spruce Park. And that is particularly because we're under a canopy. It creates a different ground environment for the plants that are there, for the critters that live there, and for the people that live there. And so I pledge efforts to protect the trees and to protect our character of our little village. And that is what I came to say today. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Sir, I saw your hand next.
Chair Newton, I'm Tim Ramey, PO Box 429, Cannon Beach, Oregon. I'd like to speak a moment about the tree issue as well. I appreciate the tree committee's work on this. I think we're going to a good place, maybe, but this still has a long way to go, in my opinion. Previous speaker talked about balancing the needs and demands of people in the city. This is protecting trees or other forms of natural beauty. And I'm all about that balance. However, because of the urban growth boundary and the way Senate Bill 100 delineated our job as inside the urban growth boundary, we're trying to get this done right. I'm going to guess it's probably decent. It's probably 1% of Clatsop County, and everything else is farm forest overlay, 80-acre zoning. And it's just really not the job of the people within the urban growth boundary to control greenhouse gases or otherwise. We might all want to do our part. I drive an electric car. But at the end of the day, our job is to house people within the city. And this tree ordinance really goes too far. I've got 3 empty lots on the street I live on. And one of them, I just did a back of the envelope calculation, probably a $200,000 cost to the city to site a house there. It would be insanity. And okay, there's members of the committee who would say, big deal, that's the developer's problem. But that increases the costs of housing in the city. So we don't want to do that. We want to have balance. I urge you to continue to strive for balance.
Thank you for your testimony. Is there anyone else in the audience who'd like to speak? Please.
Clay, just a minute. I think people have misunderstood that this is just general commentary as opposed to trees. And I think what we're getting is all the tree stuff now, if you're okay with that.
I'm okay with it.
Okay, just so you know.
It's the
Okay.
first item.
Okay.
Sure.
It's usually different things than what are on the agenda, but I wasn't sure.
That's fine.
If it's okay,
It's absolutely fine.
great.
Please go ahead.
I'm Jan Siebert Warmond of the Friends of the Trees group. And that is care of P.O. Box 778, Cannon Beach, 97110. Dear Planning Commissioners, as coordinator of the Cannon Beach Friends of the Trees, I would like to say that we wholeheartedly support the second draft of the updated Cannon Beach Tree Protection and Removal Zoning Ordinance 24-02. We see the need to strengthen our existing tree ordinance as vital to the present and future health of our community. We give our thanks to all who are helping with this very important work. And we know it's not easy, so thank you so much.
Thank you. Is there anyone else who would like to come forward at this time of public comment in the audience? Do we have anyone online who suggests?
There is one online, but based on an email this evening, I believe he is wanting to speak about trees.
We will, is the person online?
That was CJ Hughes. I saw another hand go up for Susan Glarum. I'm not sure.
Okay. Mr. Hughes, you're welcome to speak now, or if you'd like to speak when we're considering the tree ordinance, you're welcome to speak then as well. If I see your hand up, so Mr. Hughes, go ahead.
Sure. Yeah, now it's totally fine. Thank you. I'd like to start by sharing my appreciation for how the members of the Planning Commission followed through on their statement from the initial proposal and clarifying that was meant to be a first draft and also followed through on that by making meaningful changes to address the biggest issues for a homeowner. I'd also like to thank Les in particular for taking the time to meet with me in person since that meeting. It's clearly challenging to find the right balance between preserving trees as an important part of our ecosystem and allowing for thoughtful improvements in development. And clearly there's been a lot of good work to this point. And again, I want to thank the members of the Planning Commission and the people that were involved in putting together this proposal. However, I'd also like to speak to this through the lens of somebody who has been in the planning process of building a house in Cannon Beach for the past couple of years, and along with my wife are currently the owners of a vacant lot. So when I read through plan changes like this, I think about how it will impact the plans that we've already made, but it will also impact how we think about things like replantings, knowing that there is a potential future significant cost to anything that we do. So when I think about things like trying to build around trees or anything that we think about in terms of hardscaping, where the actual building goes in the lot, there is a lot of thoughtful work that we can do now to try and protect a lot of that, but there's also a consideration for costs of how we work around these existing impediments. For example, think about a significant tree built right in the middle of your lot, but also where we think about replantings. And I would love to be able to be in the position where, for example, we can keep the same sort of coverage or maximize it as much as we can in the course of our development. But when I think about things like the restrictions and the inability to prune trees or take care of trees that might become a problem in the future, even keeping a tree now that might be close to the foundation but become an issue or potentially cause damage to the structure at some point in the future, what tools will be available to us at that point? It's really difficult to think down the line when I look at potential legislation or changes to the municipal code that really make it difficult to have wiggle room or have options as a homeowner down the line. So the thing that I would just encourage the Planning Commission to do is continue to hopefully make this a dialogue and discussion with the people in the city. And my hope is that this is a second draft that we can keep iterating on that is very, very much in the right direction, but continue to listen to people in the community and just take feedback, knowing that we're thinking about this the lens of what this will cost, and knowing that not everybody is going to have the means, hopefully, to do the thoughtful thing of balancing protecting trees with making sure that anything that they build and develop meets the needs of their family. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else who has public comment online? Okay. Oh, was there a hand up? I see Susan Galaram. Please go ahead.
Susan Glaram, P.O. Box 108, Cannon Beach. I just want to say a huge thank you to all the people who have worked so many hours with so much diligence to craft the very best tree protection ordinance possible. We need to do everything possible to make sure that proper legal procedures are followed to cut down a tree, and stiff fines are in place to discourage anyone from cutting down a tree illegally. In the last few years, Cannon Beach has lost way too many trees. Trees are very important for air and water quality, for the sake of our wildlife, and the mental and physical health of residents and visitors. Trees are beautiful, and being among them is healing. I ask that you approve this ordinance. Thank you.
Thank you. Would anyone else like to speak? I see Candy. I see your hand up. Please go ahead.
Hi, my name is Candy Rudin. I'm at P.O. Box 370, Sumner, Washington. We were either fortunate or very unfortunate to have recently purchased a piece of property in Cannon Beach. And I did submit a letter to the city, and I am a tree lover. I'm an avid gardener. However, my concerns are having significant trees in an urban density zoning, and also having significant trees and being requested to completely design a family home around either one significant tree or multiple significant trees. And this potentially can leave the piece of property that my husband and I worked diligently on for over 40 years, working and saving money in order to live our dream to purchase a piece of property in Cannon Beach, completely unusable and financially devastating. And I just hope again that this is a second draft and that the city council is reviewing the tree ordinance amendment request seriously, so that whatever amendments end up taking place can globally work for all parties involved in Cannon Beach. Thank you.
Thank you. Would anyone else like to come forward with public comment online at this time? No hands up. Okay, great. Thank you, everyone. Move on to our first item. And just to be clear to those people who've already spoken, if you have more to add, you can do it at this time, because we are going to be talking about the zoning ordinance text amendment. So a legislative item. It's continuation of Cannon Beach request for text amendment to municipal code 17.70 tree removal and protection. Text amendment request will be reviewed against the criteria of the municipal code 17.86.070A amendments, criteria, and statewide planning. Does anyone object to the jurisdiction of the planning commission to hear this matter at this time? Do we have our counsel
Yes, we do.
online?
Yes.
Carrie's on that. Carrie, do I need to read that? This sounds like I'm on for a this is quasi judicial here, isn't it? I don't need to read that.
No, you don't. It's a legislative hearing, so the quasi judicial procedures do not apply. So you do
Yeah.
not need to read it.
Yeah, okay, so strike that. Okay, we really don't need a staff, there's been an amendment to the staff report that would require, so we don't need that either. But I bet we do have additional correspondence or testimony at this point. I think we'll go to testimony.
Do you?
Sure. Could I ask your permission to step around, much like I did last
Yeah,
time?
that's
I've got a very brief prepared statement on behalf of the Tree Focus Group.
I'd love,
I'd like to go ahead and read that into the record, and then I'll return.
okay,
Okay?
that would be okay. What I'm gonna do then is I'm gonna open up the public testimony portion
Tell
and
me when.
I'm not playing favorites here, but I think this could be helpful because this is a guy on the deal. So I'm gonna let him go first. Don't take it like this is a stacked game or anything. But Les is a very key person, and I heard your comments last time and they were very helpful. So public testimony is now open. Mr. Sinclair, please go ahead.
Les Sinclair, P.O. Box 1394 here in Cannon Beach. Planning Commission and audience, thank you. I want to acknowledge the hard work that's been done by my fellow focus group members on this now second draft of our proposal. That's Stacey Winfield and Seabrook Warmond, Lisa Kerr, Mr. Mike Bates, and myself have made up this group. And I also want to thank all of the participants that have taken the time to come in and share with us. Thank you so much. And that goes to the people who responded to us 2 months ago as well. We got a lot of value out of that feedback. But I've got just a real short statement here about what we're trying to achieve. We, and I'm speaking on behalf of the focus, believe the tree canopy is the best defense against many of the future impacts of global warming. I feel like large trees are the most impactful toward that end. They contribute the most to the natural aesthetic character of the Oregon coast. They contribute most significantly to the city's. And frankly, they're effectively impossible to replace, at least in our own lifetimes. And I'm speaking specifically of very large trees, we believe that our comprehensive plan requires us to do better. And I'd like to read 3 of the general policies that are found on page 7 of the comprehensive plan. Number 14, to ensure that development is designed to preserve significant site features such as trees, streams, and wetlands. Number 15, the city shall regulate the removal of trees in order to preserve the city's aesthetic character, as well as to control problems associated with soil erosion and landslide hazard. And then number 16, to provide flexibility in regulations governing site design so that developments can be adapted to specific site conditions. We think we've got the authority to consider enhancing our tree protection. And then finally, we, the focus group, recognize the tension that exists between the preservation of trees and the creation of needed housing. We believe it's possible to do a better job of both. And that's that balance that we're trying to strike. Toward this end, we've crafted an ordinance that we believe does the following things. It encourages owners to consider tree protection early in the planning process. This version significantly reduces the financial impact for owners of big trees. What we propose manages all trees through one consistent, transparent tree removal. We provide protection for big trees and meaningful penalties for illegal removal. We provide a workflow whereby no significant tree, which we define in our document, no matter how large it is, can prevent the development of a property. And then finally, we lay out a fee schedule where the city may be able to replant lost trees when the owner cannot do so. So those are kind of where we're trying to head. We may not hit it completely. But again, that's where our heart is. That's what we're trying to do, and we welcome feedback.
Thank you for that. Is there anyone else who would like to come forward at this time with public testimony on our proposed? Yes, sir. Please come forward.
Hi, I'm Jeff Moon, live Oregon Drive, Oregon City, Oregon. I own property here in town on the east side of 101, just north of East Surfcrest. Had 1.15 acres 3.5 years ago. It was in the urban growth boundary, probably over 10 years ago. It's in the city limits now. And I thank you guys for allowing me to partition of the land into 3 pieces. And you know, over the last 3.5 years that I've owned this land, I tried to put a cottage industry on there. Now it's denied. Now we got 3 lots up there. I'm going to put a house on the westernmost lot and do some stuff. I planned for this for years, looking at, you know, significant trees. And I disagree with a significant tree being 24 inches in diameter. That is not a very old tree. I've worked in the wood industry for over 30 years now. On the coast in Canada Beach, where we get 2.5, 3 times more rain than we do in Willamette Valley, they grow faster. I mean, that could be a 30-year tree. We're not talking a significant tree or a heritage tree at this point. I think a significant tree should be 48 inches, so 4 feet in diameter. Big tree, something that you look at. I remember looking at that tree that was from our vantage point on Vista Del Mar growing up, and it was a huge tree, 250 feet tall or something. It was a landmark heritage tree. It got hit by lightning early on, and it started dying. Nobody cut it. 20, you know, next windstorm, 20 feet left, gone. You know, 40 feet more came down a couple years later. It just kept coming down. City finally in the 80s had to cut it down because it was dangerous and all that stuff. So it wasn't preserved because of topping after storm or whatever. But I just went up to my property this afternoon, looked at the trees that I want to keep as significant trees, which I consider over 4 foot in diameter. So I have a 69-inch diameter tree. Based on the cost as a fine, it would cost me $371,035 as a fine, plus a $4,000 fine for a significant tree, and another $1,000 if I wasn't able to replant it on that property. And I got a 57-inch tree, a 55-inch diameter tree, 83-inch diameter tree, which is nearly 7 foot, and a 54-inch tree in diameter. All those added up, if I had to take them down, which I'm not, those are the ones I saved, and I knew I was going to save them. They were the biggest ones. $1.632 million, you're telling me, based on basic cost of the tree, based on $100 per square inch of the mass of a tree at 4.5 feet at breast height. Okay. I've got trees that are, you know, 24 inches or so. They're in easements for power utilities or whatever. There's a couple of those that are going to have to come down. There's danger trees. There's trees that are nurse trees. Some of them are great, like one of the big ones. You know, the roots are this high, but they're strong enough. The arborists looked at them and stuff. They're good trees. we're gonna save them. But I'd love to have you guys, if anybody on the group that wants to do a little field trip to my property, I encourage that. Because we can see, look at dead trees, we can look at dying trees and everything else. And there's so many things that are bad about this policy. And my parents' property is like 5 acres and it's in an urban growth. And there's no way, there's a driveway through there now. If you wanted development into just 1 acre lots, you got driveways, you got utilities, 10, 20-foot utility easements. And some of the stuff, you can't even go under the roots and drill under them because the slope is too low and you have to have a straight pipe through it and stuff. So
I understand. Thank you. I am trying to keep to that 3 minute.
I know, but
It's important.
so much on this.
That's why we let you go, for sure.
That is not right.
I understand.
You guys will not be able to develop the stuff that Lovett's gonna bring into, you guys have to keep growing the city. There's no way people can develop it. It's gonna be too.
I understand your point. I want to make sure we have room for everyone to speak. Thank you, Mr. Min. Anyone else who'd like to come forward at this time? Here in the back, I see.
Jay Orloff, PO Box 563, Kennedy, Beach, Oregon 970. Les, thank you for your commentary. It's helpful to understand what you guys are trying to do here, and I acknowledge what you're looking to do. I'm here today not to really talk about feelings, but more look into the written language held within here. I'm very much hoping that this is a second draft and is not looking to be pushed to the city commission or city council quite yet, because
Can I just answer that? That is correct.
okay, because there is a lot of circular language, missing information, and some of the stuff that you added, I can't quite agree with quite yet. I feel that you are moving in the right direction. It is an improvement from the first draft, but there's a few things that I found in here. I'm going to start with the definitions. Our definition of city arborist is very vague. I think you guys need to be very clear on what the role of the city arborist is. An ISA certified arborist is not qualified to be doing tree risk assessment. That is a separate qualification held within the ISA. And all this information is within the ISA website. I had a little bit of resistance on my utilizing a local consultant in the area. So this time I've expanded my research into Multnomah County and talking to arborists in Portland to further my information understanding. There's also another assessment that you're looking to do, which is tree value assessment. That carries a qualification that's called tree and plant appraisal qualification using the TF method, which you mentioned in here. You don't have a person who's qualified to be making these assessments, making these hazard evaluations. I think that's going to open the city up to a risk of liability and litigation by having someone doing stuff that is not qualified for. Another quick note, critical root zone, the interior noting radius of 1 foot diameter for 1 foot for each inch of diameter. The actual Western industry standard is 6 inches. Essentially, this is being doubled. The same thing with the TPZ, noted to be circle around tree, 2 feet for every inch of trunk. Again, Western Oregon is 1 foot standard, 1 foot for 1 inch. So again, this is being doubled. Also, a missing definition for tree stump. You don't have a definition here. It's noted multiple times, referenced in multiple sections. There is no definition for tree stump. Is it 24 inches or is it cut at grade? Significant trees not cut. Moving the footprint. I don't understand where this 10 foot from the radius or perimeter of the trees. That's in section A, B, and C. This is all noted in my commentary that I provided to you as well. It seems like an arbitrary definition. I think you should read the Bateman Seidel commentary response paragraph 2, page 2, paragraphs 3 and 4. They really break it down on what the qualifications and what possible problems there is in here.
Mr. Orloff?
Yeah.
We're over 3 minutes. I share your concern with some of the definitions.
You have the information. In the
If we have the information in the packet, it will be considered. Thank you. Is there anyone else who'd like to come forward at this time? A reminder, we are trying to stay to 3 minutes. We're not going to hold you to 3 minutes on the button. There's important information you're sharing with us, but it is important that we are able to get through everything we have to get through tonight. Anyone else in the audience who'd like to come forward at this time? Yes, sir.
Steve Moon, PO Box 162, Cannon Beach. 3 minutes. It's impossible for me to go over all the things that are wrong with this in 3 minutes. So I just want to reiterate that I appreciate you guys trying to do what you're doing. But my question first is maybe less answer a question.
Not in this setting, but we're certainly listening, and
Here's a question.
that'll be perfect.
Committee is how can the public comment more to the committee, get some of the issues out that need work, I think. And also, again, why is this turning into a huge financial burden on whoever has a tree on their property? And there's already so many restrictions upon people with setbacks and all that other stuff. You have a 50 by 100 lot, and then you take the normal restrictions, cut that down, and then you add a tree just in the wrong spot, it makes your property unusable. I have a large property and I have lots of trees, but how can I financially maintain that forest? I call it forest. When I have to buy a permit, get every, thousands of dollars to get it assessed and then reassessed and then get an arborist in there to do the work. I can't afford that. Back in 2007, I had 28 trees come down in that storm. What would I do now? Trees were leaning, they had to come down, trees came down on my house. That costs money. And then you throw permits, and then after permits, if the tree falls down, you guys want permit, after tree falls. There's just so many things in here, like protecting the tree with a chain link fence. It's like, why would you need a chain link fence to protect the root structure while you're doing construction? Why can't you just have it taped off or use the regular plastic fencing? There's just so many things I can't go over, and you guys don't have time for tonight, but there's a lot, even though there's a second draft, there's a lot of things that need to be talked about. And I'd like to be able to communicate with you guys about that. So maybe you guys have a public forum or something with the committee. That would be greatly appreciated.
You can contact any one of us, and you can just let me.
I'd rather talk to all of you at once.
Well, I will tell you, although I kidding, that's time, but we're going to continue this conversation because it's important. Every letter that comes in, I read. So, and frankly, the letters, usually people outline their points. I'm pretty good with my note taking, but I'm not the best. But the letters are very helpful. Certainly public testimony is important. You being here, showing your compassion or passion about this is important. But we do read those letters, every one of them. And if there's 55 items you need to get out there, put it in writing, get it to us.
I understand some people have the money to pay all these fees and stuff, but personally, I love trees. I respect trees. And I don't want to cut any tree down, but every tree has its life cycle. Some get sick and die, some grow to be beautiful giants, and everything in between, Mother Nature, windstorms, and I just can't financially, I work my butt off, and I just cannot financially take a hit like that because of a tree on my property that gets sick and, dies or needs to be, just think we're not all rich, okay?
Thank you, Mr. Mann. Appreciate it.
We live in Cannon Beach, but we're not all rich.
Thank you for your testimony. Is there anyone else who'd like to come forward? Yes, sir.
Stephen Craig, Tulip, Post Office Box 1073, Cannon Beach, Oregon. Yeah, other people have talked, expressed my appreciation for the volunteer work that everybody does in considering this. One thing that I struggle with and it's more of a question. I realize you can't answer it now, but maybe in a future draft, you can explain to the gentleman back here with the tree experience who addressed the size of the significant tree. I'm having a real problem coming up with what is a criteria for the definition of your significant trees. 18-inch for the conifer, I think it is, or for the deciduous, and the 24-inch for the conifer. That would be helpful if that were explained. What sort of criteria, where did that come from? Because to me, I don't have the experience in the tree industry like the gentleman behind me who spoke earlier, but that just seems, looking around, like that's more of a restrictive area. And putting $4,000 to cut down a significant tree, that can add the cost up on some of these lots. So I would just ask in a future iteration, what is the criteria for that significant tree as defined, and where does that come from? I think that would go a long ways and some clarification, at least from my point. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Is there anyone else who'd like to come forward? Okay, we can come back to you if you change your mind. Is there anyone online who would like to come forward at this time? I'll look for raised hands. And I do see a raised hand, although I don't see a name.
Ellison Reynolds.
Ms. Reynolds, please go ahead.
Yes, can you guys hear me?
Loud and clear.
Perfect. Well, good evening, Planning Commissioner members. I'm Ellison Reynolds. I'm a land use attorney with Stoll Reeves. Address is 760 Southwest 9th Avenue in Portland. And I'm here representing 546 Oak Street 2 LLC. The owners of that property have both a home in the city and an adjacent lot that they're hoping to develop with an additional home in the future. We also provided some longer comments in writing today, and I do believe you will read them, but they were right before this meeting, and given the volume of your packet today, I'm expecting you have not gotten to review those yet. So I just want to touch on a few of the issues, but we did raise a few additional things in there as well that you can look at in your leisure. So we really appreciate a lot of the changes that were made from the last version. It's clear that a lot of time was spent on this, and it does address a lot of the concerns that we previously raised. One other overarching thing, though, that we want to echo that you've heard from some others is that even in this revised form, we still have concerns about the added expense and the process that these rule changes require. It's not clear that this is the best way to achieve the city's goals for housing and a robust urban canopy. And we've heard from other owners that they are hesitant to plant trees or may seek to remove trees before they get too large to avoid those significant costs you've heard about, or in many cases, a situation where they could not legally remove the tree anymore. And we'd be faced with a situation where they're kind of deciding, right, do I actually try to comply with this law, or do I not have an option? So we urge you to think about these changes through that lens and make sure that all of the potential unintended consequences are considered as well. But we did actually have a couple of comments on the specific language that we think will kind of make it better and hopefully comport with some of the legal principles that the Bateman-Seidel letter laid out, which we agree with. First is on section 1770.020B1. And so this is the section that requires an applicant to show that they can't meet a list of these mitigation measures, things like a setback reduction, to save a significant tree for a development proposal. So on this section, we'd like to see a clarification that the owner, quote, cannot meet, which is the standard, these steps if the city's regulations, a land use approval that applies to that site, like a conditional use permit or something that might restrict where you could develop, or private restrictions like CC&Rs that were adopted would prevent the applicant from making that change. This is important for sites like those in Chapman Point, where the CC&Rs required by the subdivision actually limit development to a specific footprint. So you couldn't move the building outside of that footprint because of the CC&Rs. We'd also like to see a clarification that an applicant who is implementing these standards, which is again the wording that's used, can do that by explaining to the city that a measure it wouldn't actually make a difference for a tree in a certain situation. So again, that example of the setback reduction, if the tree that is in question is far away from the setback area, we'd want to make sure that the city wouldn't require the applicant to go seek a setback reduction, since it wouldn't help that tree, and instead would just accept an explanation as to why this measure wouldn't be helpful. One of the other sections states that trees cannot be removed or chopped, and the quote is solely for views. We noted that this is not a clear and objective standard, since it's not clear how the city would determine the motivation for tree removal. And so we urge the commission to focus on regulations that are based on sort of the expert best practices that the committee has been gathering, rather than trying to understand a property owner's motivation.
Ms. Reynolds, excuse me for interrupting you.
No worries.
I promise that we will not push anything forward that does not incorporate anything that is in your letter. But we have run over 3 minutes.
Wonderful. Well, I am actually done. So thank you so much. I appreciate
Okay.
the time.
Very good. Thank you for those thoughtful points. Other people online?
We have a Heather Householder.
Heather Householder, please go ahead.
Just a brief, I want to, a couple folks back, just want to reiterate with some of the definitions that you have written. Oh, I didn't start with my name and address. Heather Householder, I represent Pacific Power and Light, vegetation management. So probably the best mailing address is 7544 Northeast 33rd Drive, Portland, Oregon. I would urge you guys to, and you have some of these definitions, to use the ANSI 300 definitions. You guys are requiring the ANSI 300 standards be met when it comes to tree pruning. I would strongly suggest that you actually use the definitions in this tree ordinance that are written out with the ANSI 300. That's basically mine.
Thank you very much. Anyone else, Robin?
No.
Is there anyone else in the audience who has changed their mind and would like to speak at this time? Okay, and we'll close the public testimony at this point and go to our consideration.
Can we respond to a couple of points that were made?
Absolutely, yeah.
You know, you guys jump in as
Sure.
they raise questions. Les, do you want to go ahead or would you like? You do it. First off, I do want to thank the attorney from Stoll Reeves. These are the kind of letters that help us very much. They're very specific. They give us guidance in what we can do better. I will add, I haven't read the whole thing because I just got it, so I can't give you the same guarantee that Clay just did that we'll adopt everything in this letter.
Oh, no, I did not make that guarantee. I said, if we pushed anything forward tonight, we would consider.
No, we're not going to push forward.
Careful on that.
Second, there was a real misconception, the Moons. I wish we could talk directly instead of me kind of acting like you're not here. But there is no way that millions of dollars would be owed under that provision for a few trees. Way it works is repair or if you cut, replace. If you can't, pay $1,000. Now, for a significant tree, it's the same, but because we're just going 1 for 1 to make things easy, we still do not feel like $1,000 actually reflects the fact that we have to go probably for our city and for the people who are also looking at this from the other side saying, I like these trees. We plant 4 of them. The $1,000 was picked as a cost number. We have a little bit more sharpening to do on that. Our estimates have been in the range of, depending on size and location, all the other stuff, from $1,000 to $2,000. That might be high. We want to find out, and we're working that point. But you posited 4 trees, all of them significant, $1.6 million. Those 4 trees would probably, if you couldn't replace them, cost you $20,000. So I'm not saying that that's an acceptable amount of money, but the way the code is currently written, that's what it would be. And I wanted to respond to that. Second, Mr. Ramey, we keep hearing about Governor McCall.
Michael, just one thing,
Yeah.
I know you didn't mean to, but we're not in a conversation mode. Unless the body wants to change it to a conversation mode, if you address the
I
audience
am,
directly.
I'm not
To
asking.
the comment
If
generally.
you just want to say it's
Just
Mr. Ramey's
respond.
comment, yes.
comment,
Okay.
Yeah.
To Mr. Ramey's comments then, the Tom McCall and the land planning legislation and rules that were put in place in the sixties, they were a big deal. I agree. At the time, they changed everything in Oregon planning. If somebody had asked why at the time or resisted, we wouldn't have those. That aside, I think your interpretation of that law is incorrect. If you look at the way that came out, there were a number of planning goals that were imposed upon the state and each jurisdiction to implement the law that he put in place. One of them was natural resources and trees, which is an obligation under that law that's imposed upon cities like this. There's also goal number 6 that says protect the air in the city and avoid thermal pollution. We heard tonight about how that might be a problem if we cut all the trees. So it wasn't a matter of everything outside the urban boundary was sacred and we're going to protect those, and everything in we're going to cut. That was never the law. That was never intended to be the law. And the last one I want to respond to is Mr. Orloff's point that that the numbers we picked are arbitrary, the 10 foot. And I agree, you have to pick a number. Unfortunately, we are sitting here under a legal regime in the state that you have to have clear and objective standards. We were sitting in a situation where we either implemented the ISA standard, and we can debate on what that is, but even accepting Mr. Orloff's proposition, a foot for every foot of diameter, you still go out 12 feet. You still go out 12 feet. And you're right. We were sitting there going, we want people to build houses. So we didn't want to go out 12 feet. We picked it as 10. We set it there. And there is good science in it that says within 10 feet of a tree, no root more than 2 inches in diameter should be cut. So we just picked that number, and if it's the wrong one, I'm not willing to give up that point, but I acknowledge the point. The second one is on, again, after responding to the moons, $1,000 to replace a tree. That, it's at the applicant's option, replace or pay $1,000. And it's just one for one. We do agree that the way we set that up at one point was probably excessive, and we are listening and we're continuing to listen, and we'll go back and write this up. But I just want you to understand that that is cost. And if we've gone a little bit high, then we'll sharpen our pencils, but we are trying to get down to cost. Okay? So those were the points that I wanted to make in response to the testimony. And I would like to respond to everybody's questions. Mr. Turlip, I heard you. And it's a debate we've been having. We're trying to figure that out. If you look at, and this was an interesting point on the last hearing, the data we provided with the first package, that foil set, there is a foil in the back from a U.S. Department of Agriculture study conducted in 1984. Mr. Orloff said 84, you could find better science. You probably can, but that was the last date where the Forest Service used diameter at breast height as the measure of a tree. After that, they went into basal area. And the basal area, you can back into DBM, but you have to have a whole bunch of other information to do it. And we all know that, if you're looking at a forest out here, basal area is going down as we shorten the harvest periods out there. The other reason that report was important was it did show a forest of approximately 90 years old. 90 years ago, this forest was cut. 90 years ago, this forest was cut. And it broke down the whole forest in these amazing statistics, like what is the average size of a tree at 90 years old? And it was by deciduous and Douglas fir and western hemlock and Sitka spruce. And right around the 24-inch area was the average. That 50% was above, 50% above, and 50% was below. And that was the number we picked. As you go farther in time, that number gets bigger. We acknowledge, and we're trying to find that right number. But, 24 was, if you go out and look through these reserves out here, if you walk through them, there aren't a lot of trees under 24 inches. There are not a lot of trees under 30 inches out there. So, we understand, and we're trying to find that right number, but that's where we are right now. So, sorry, I just wanted to get everybody's questions answered as best I could. And thank you for your time.
Listening to you, Mike, it's a reminder to me of, it's awesome the amount of energy and time you guys have spent researching this. It's also a reminder for me of process, and maybe at this point, one of the notes I had to myself was talking about our process, how we got to where we are right now, and maybe talking about how we take next steps. As I looked at the letter from our council in terms of some of the challenges, and I've heard the testimony from people, I think one of the challenges we have is just as good as you guys are, as good as you've been, there are people that are better and are specialists. One of the things that helped us in the wetland consideration was when Murph Walker came in, a blessing from above, and gave us very specific examples of how to think about some of the things that are in front of us. And we haven't done that with an independent person in front of the.
Okay. Yes, you're right.
And I think it would be helpful for people concerned about some of the issues we've heard tonight and our other time on this, to have an opinion of a specialist in the process. That's my opinion. We also had a little different process with Marcy running, more on point, if you will. And I don't know if we want to bring her and her team in on this at this point, but it's something to maybe talk about in the context of process. You guys have done an amazing job to get us to this point. And now I think it's worth talking about having a specialist come in or specialists come in.
I'm not sure.
On things like definitions.
We are seeking specialist definitions.
I think it would be helpful to have that more public.
Yeah. Okay.
I think that's really important.
All right.
That's my opinion. Any other?
No, I would agree. I think some transparency. You've gotten such an amazing body of work here, but I do think based on public comment, having the specialist here where the public can actually receive the same information may be really helpful.
Okay. Interesting. There are other changes I'd like to make to the PAPA process. I think our PAPA letter, our notice, and unless it has to be written in terms that said, you better fucking pay attention to this, and pardon my French, or you're going to lose your property. That needs to change, Stephen, and I don't know that we can do that, but it is a shock to everybody that gets it, and it's not the truth. And I'd like to fix that.
Yeah, I don't know how we are able to do that. That was a discussion with our attorneys, similar to wetlands. And wetlands, it just went to those property owners that it could potentially impact.
I think it's what we've used for a long time, and I'm fine with it.
It's just a state requirement, and we are going to be more conservative than and send out more notice than less. So from that perspective, on any of these ordinances that could potentially impact uses or values, it's going out to any property owner that may impact.
Absolutely, it should, but it should be a little bit more balanced in the way it is stated, as opposed to a giant flashing red light that doesn't really explain what you mean.
Sure.
And I think the language could be improved.
Yeah, and that's one thing, there's specific language that you have to have as part of it. That's not just us, that's ORS and things like that. And I can't remember, measure 56.
57.
57, I'm sorry. You know, it's pretty specific in terms of the types of language that you have to have in there. And it does put up a red flag when you see it. And I think it's supposed to.
I think here's what I'd like to do. Just here's the required notice we're supposed to give you. It's required by ORS.
Yeah.
Put it in there in quotes and send it out to people, as opposed to make it look like it's coming from the city and scaring people.
Yeah, I'm willing to look at it in whatever fashion to try to do just that. I was just following what.
I know, I got it. No, I'm saying you did. We were doing the process.
And I get it, and I can always try to see, you know, how it can be softened so that not necessarily, it's supposed to give someone the idea that, hey, something's going on, I better call in, you know, to have that type of conversation or make these meetings. So, but I'm more than willing to look at that language, because I'm sure we're gonna have to do it again at some point.
Yeah. One of the things I think that would have helped is if we could have made our draft text available simultaneous with the letter.
Sure.
In fact, it didn't come out until the packet came out.
Sure.
You know, so that was something I think we could try to do better.
Sure, and oftentimes it's not totally perfect, because those notices sometimes have to go out well before maybe the packets and things like that are ready. So it's not a perfect system, but there is an ability, you know, on some of this stuff that if we know it's gonna go out, to try to have a draft before that goes out, so that when it goes out, people have something to look at immediately.
I think that would be.
I think you're right on that.
We did actually try to get this out for people in the audience 2 weeks early, but we got the notice from the attorneys the day we were gonna post it, so we held it until we had a chance to look at that. So apologies on that. We did make an effort to get it out early, but
You're talking about draft.
this last draft, yeah. So sorry.
That's where we tried to get it on the website, put it on the apps and things like that, because it, you know, and that was the reason why, and we'll probably do it again before we finish tonight, is to provide everyone with the date specific that something could be continued to, because the notice doesn't need to go out again, but that once we got that information, that's when we tried to put it on the website and blast it out to the email list and things like that, to try to get it out as best as we could.
So is there a plan going forward? What are the next steps?
Well, the next steps for us would have been to go modify it as the team sees fit. You know, I'm not certain everybody would agree with the points made today, but you know how that goes. You were in it with wetlands. So do that. If it feels like we're close, I mean, there are some very good hard recommendations from Mr. Turlip and others, you know, that I think probably, and if I go back a little bit, others hold that same concern about the size of the tree we deem significant. We need to have a lot more discussion on that. If it feels like we can close that loop, you know, I'd rather see what the response from the city is, because we are trying to be responsive to them. And then get it into legal.
Yeah, that's what I was gonna.
And get it into legal, and then get it, anybody else who wants to look at it. And then do our last notice for adoption, assuming we can get it within the range that people say it's good enough for them.
Is there any reason, I think there've been about 2 or 3 people who said, you know, why hasn't there been a community meeting that's not a hearing?
Well,
is there any reason to consider doing that?
It's kind of hard to draft that way.
Okay.
It really is. It's better to come up with some ideas, get it out with people understanding that we're not going to pull a fast one on them, that it's going to take several months to get that first draft down to something everybody can live with. This process is working, I think.
Sure. I'm just.
But I'd like to respond. I am concerned using planning commission time in this way. You know, to continually keep running our latest thoughts out and getting the public feedback. But I've observed several different ways in the time I've been in this city, and this is the only way that I see people coming to talk.
Yeah.
And so I don't like, you know, having to do it this way, but this seems to be the way that works.
What about using more of a work session where we had a specialist?
We have had work sessions.
And attendance?
There was one where nobody from the planning commission showed up. So, except Les. So the attendance was poor. I mean, it's,
Well, I don't, yeah, that's my I share, I think Mickey's concern. Is this the best use of this body's purpose? And I'm not sure it is, but it does work right now. And I'd be open to coming up with alternative ways to have public meetings. Not the least of which is, where would you do it?
Bill, you have a whole notice issue and all that stuff. We could ask our fund council to work with us on that, but let's take it offline.
Yeah, that's what I would
And
do.
ask if there's something, and I see you're nodding, so thank you.
When we went through some of the trickier items on wetland, we did it with Mirth Walker online. What about something like that?
Mirth was just another citizen. She wasn't an expert.
Very qualified.
I know, and Mirth is, and she has looked at trees before and she's. free to-
Not trees. My point is, during the wetland conversation, some of these issues that were not clear, because either we weren't experts or there was contention around them, it helps to have someone who is a specialist in that field that can talk about a range of sizes of wetlands in our conversation tonight, what different jurisdictions are doing on tree size. That conversation, having that in this forum.
Well, I think that's what you asked us to do. I mean, not 10 minutes ago, I mean, my note was, we need to bring specialist input into a public forum and speaking for myself, I think we're going to have to really understand who's an expert, because the expert that walked in the door for wetlands got pretty lucky that way, I think.
Yeah.
Have we had conversations with the city arborist as well as other arborists that work routinely in the city? Absolutely. Are they the experts? I don't know.
I think transparency is the issue. I think I'm going to put this right out there so that we can all acknowledge the elephant in the room.
Great.
It's a little bit awkward to have members of this body promoting and writing the code without some kind of buffer individual. So we were lucky we had Marcy who could help sort of represent that as we shepherded it through the
I
process.
agree with that.
So I think what we're running into is that there's a little bit of a trust issue
Yeah.
without some somewhat disinterested third party to help guide the conversation and to help provide some input. So not that I think you haven't done your research. I think you have. I have ultimate faith in the committee who has worked on this, I should say, focus group. But I think at some point, we do need to have one step back and have a third party able to represent some of these ideas and guide a
I
conversation.
think that's a good point. I mean, as we're going through this, and you probably felt the same way, we had a process, and it was Herbworks and, they were busy doing bigger things and you have to break out more critical items and run you're right. Herbworks has not been involved in this the way they were with wetlands, and I think we need to bring them in.
Whether it's them or someone else,
Yeah,
I'm not saying
Yeah.
that, and I'm not saying Herbworks needs to be the one, but I do think that at this point, for this final step, we need to separate.
It's reasonable.
Yeah.
But I do want to caution, when you get into, and it's the argument, the discussion we had about charrettes. When you open up a process to the entire community from step one and say, what do you want? You make very little process. So in between, there's an in between.
Yes.
And I would like to strike that with you.
Right. I think that that's not my vision.
Yeah.
My vision is not to go back to the drawing board.
No, I agree.
Create. I think what I see here is a great framework that just needs some fine tuning. But at this point, maybe the fine tuning needs to come from another source than.
No, I just.
If we could.
At least the conversation,
Here's what we will commit to. We will take it to an expert. We will be part of the discussion as we were with wetlands.
And I think the expert needs to be in a public.
I agree. And they will be back with us when we return.
And I think it's just really important that expert not appear to simply be your mouthpiece, but that they do represent, and it's clear that they are bringing their own expertise to it.
Okay, fair enough. Yes.
Yeah, Clay, I mean, I think when we were doing wetlands, you know, Marcy was involved in that and she had brought expert in when she was working with the group. I think we even did a couple of work sessions to talk language and different things like that. And in the end, I thought it was fairly impactful in terms of having the transparent discussion out in center so that everyone could see it, yet continuing to make progress and move forward to the point in time that eventually it got back to the group and to a majority of the public that thought, hey, I think we're in the right direction. And it might not be a bad idea to consider something like that.
Okay, no.
I think
we're open to everything.
Yeah, I think you've made huge strides from where it started, where our current code is at for trees right now. And then the first iteration and then the second iteration, we're finding quite a bit. And I think having that public meeting with code writer Marcy, whether it's them or it's someone like that, for them to be the person that we can bounce our concerns about this and that throughout it. And then somebody that's an expert in tree specific arborist or whatever level of arborist that would make sense to have here, tree expert to have here, to be able to have all of these discussions about the significant tree size, the costs, and all of those additional items that are definitely the things that seem to be the most concerning to pretty much almost all the public comments that came in or revolve around a lot of that stuff that is like, well, you're getting there, but you've gone too far, but.
I will posit to you that we will get to a point where people still object. And if that point is, you know, a couple people object and the planning commission decides those objections are legitimate, then we will reject it. You know, I trust you guys to do it. And but I don't think we're gonna resolve every single issue, because I know some of these issues that were raised today, we've had some Donnybrooks in our meeting. So we will go back and have them again and see where we end up.
So how do we want to sum this point up in terms of where we're at? Just what's a tangible summary of where we're at on this right now?
I think a tangible summary is, we've got inputs, some of them very specific and helpful. All of them well-intended, and we'll take them well into consideration. We will find an expert, and I think since HerbWorks knows this, it will be HerbWorks, and they will join us at the next meeting. And, you know, we'll bring another draft. I don't know, Stephen, if we go out now, it's probably 2 months out again, right?
I was gonna say, I got a couple of dates, you know, like last time we wanted to make sure there was a date specific. The next plan commission dates are August 22nd, September 26th, and October 24th. So not saying we want to extend it. Those are, you know, I just wanted to have refer a couple of different timeframes. But
Might be too soon. So what
I think
September?
we did 2 months last time. I think it might be worth doing at a minimum that this time.
Yeah. And the commitment again is to try to get everything out 14 days before the hearing, depending on what hits us at the last minute, okay?
So at a minimum, I think what we might want to do is continue it until September 26th. We can see what's happening in the meantime. If it comes to September 26th and we're continuing, because we're doing different types of that, but maybe that makes sense to set a date of September 26th.
Yeah, and does any PO Jack?
No, I think that's actually what I would have recommended. I
Okay.
think that keeps us on track, and I think will certainly give us enough time to act on the request.
Okay, did that summarize for you guys what you?
Yeah, I mean, I think we still, HerbWorks is great, but are you also thinking an actual arborist or someone with?
Yeah, we can, there are two arborists.
Just a planning question.
We will bring the two arborists in.
Definitional.
We've used. We will bring our arborists in.
Yeah, I think that would.
If they have time, right? So.
Maybe it's not your arborist, maybe it's someone else, but to have someone who can speak.
There's a body of work that's really very recent. It's going on pretty much at the state level.
Uh-huh.
And it's all about this tension that exists between protecting trees and the cities that have tree protection ordinances and the state's desire for more housing, needed housing. And there's a pretty good body of data there. Plus some names of people that I think we might look into a little closer.
But I want to be careful again. I don't want to introduce a new person to this who says he's got it. I was gonna use a bad term. Who's got to put his mark on, or her mark on a document, as opposed to coming in and knowing what's happened, knowing our community, and can respond intelligently to questions that come in. So we need somebody that does that.
Well,
And if I airlift somebody in from Portland,
No, I'm
yeah.
not saying necessarily someone from Portland. I think that's not.
No, and we're just dragging this out a little bit, but you know, what Herbworks did was they went out and found a wetland specialist. We could ask Marcy for that kind of help.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, that wetland specialist wasn't the people that the wetland group talks about. They talk about the lady that lives here in town, you know, so we need to find the right person to.
Although I will say that the wetland specialist that Marcy found did help quite a bit refining the code.
Yeah. So
He may not have been visible up front, but he was very much a part of ensuring that it made sense.
And I think that speaks a little bit to process. Mirth was here virtually in the room, going through line by line with us and the audience. And I think that's just, and we were able to ask questions is, I think, really helpful. And it, you know, whether it's the cities or someone else, I just think having someone who's in those trenches every day, has what's industry standard, familiar with the Cannon Beach, but it's also familiar with standard of question. Really helpful.
Perfect. And we will, if we get confused along the way, we'll stop. So one of you two. Is that
doesn't have to be me. No.
No, I mean, we can't have more than two people talking offline.
Good idea, guys.
If you happen to be on the street, we can talk about it.
be back again this evening. Thank you all.
Yeah, thank you, everyone. We'll, so go ahead, Steve.
I don't know if you might want to just make a motion to continue till September 26th.
Yeah.
Do I have a motion on that?
Move, continue to the 26th of September.
For a second?
I'll second that.
Is there discussion? Tessa, will you call the roll, please?
Commissioner Matusek?
Yes.
Commissioner Moritz?
Yes.
Commissioner Bates?
Yes.
Commissioner Sinclair?
Yeah.
Commissioner Ostrander?
Yes.
Chair Newton?
Yes. We'll continue this tree removal and protection conversation until September. Okay, anybody need a break or should we move on?
I'm okay. If everybody else is fine.
Okay, let's do it. Our next item is quasi judicial public hearing SR 2224-02, Stephen and Jane Didwig requesting a setback reduction. Stephen and Jane Didwig requesting a setback reduction for structural modifications to a pre-existing non-conforming structure. The subject property address is 3063 South Pacific Street, tax lot 3300, map 51031 AD, located in a residential moderate density R1 zone. The request will be reviewed under the municipal code section 17.64.010 setback reduction provisions established. Does anyone object to the jurisdiction of the Planning Commission to hear this matter at this time? Does any commission member believe he or she has a conflict of interest or personal bias? Has any commission member had any ex parte contacts or made a site visit?
Site visit.
Site visit. May we have the staff report?
Good evening. The applicant is requesting a setback reduction for improvements exceeding 50% of the value of a pre-existing non-conforming structure at 3063 South Pacific Street. Plans of county records for the tax year ending June 30, 2024 indicate that the real market value for the structure on the property is $167,487. The building permit application was received by the city of Cannon Beach on May 29th, with a project cost estimate of $200,000. On June 6th, city staff observed that work had been started prior to the issuance of the building permit, and a stop work order was issued to the contractor that day. During the review for a type 1 development permit, which is required for the issuance of a building permit, city staff noted that a survey had not been included and that the site plan that was included with the project schematics was an aerial photo from Google Maps for a similar service, and that was not sufficient for review purposes. The contractor designer was contacted regarding this matter and informed the structure appeared not to conform to established setback requirements for the R1 zone. At the time of the site visit, it appeared that the carport was on the northern property line was within 5 feet. A site plan, Exhibit A4, was submitted in response to this request. This was followed up by a copy of survey CS number B13278, dated January 2017, which shows that the southeastern corner of the house is 4.15 feet from the southern property line. The survey does not show the distance of the carport from the northern property line. As the estimated value of the improvement exceeds 50% of the value of the structure, a setback reduction approval is required prior to the issuance of the building permit, as per Municipal Code 1782-040B, non-conforming structures. The proposed renovation will not increase the footprint of the existing dwelling or expand its non-conformity into the side yard setbacks. Moving into the applicable criteria for a setback reduction, in item number A, which is reduction of setback requirements, and then the building coverage, the staff comment is that the contractor's schematics indicate that the lower floor currently measures 640 square feet and the upper floor or attic has approximately 265 square feet of habitable floor area. An additional 310 square feet of lot coverage is present in the carport, decks, and garden shed enclosures. There is not a paved driveway. However, 2 off-street parking areas are counted for the purpose of calculating a lot coverage. The subject property is slightly larger than 50 by 100, and it is a 5,375 square foot lot. Based on this information, the lot coverage prior to the start of work is approximately 22%, and this amount is not anticipated to change as the remodel will not expand the footprint of the dwelling or add new pavement. The floor area ratio is approximately 0.16. And this will be expanded to 0.24 through the expansion of the upper floor to 662 square feet. Moving to item number 4, the staff comment is that the application intends to make improvements to a pre-existing non-conforming detached building that was constructed prior to 1930, according to the county records. The application best meets criterion F, which is rehabilitation of existing structures where other reasonable alternatives do not exist. And that concludes the staff report.
Okay, thank you. Is there any additional correspondence?
No, there's not.
They're not privy to. Okay. Then we will move to the public testimony portion of our consideration. The pertinent criteria to be considered noted in the staff reports and listed on the criteria sheets on the meeting page of the city's website. Testimony, arguments, and evidence must be directed toward those criteria, other criteria in the comprehensive plan or municipal code, which the person testifying believes apply to the decision. Failure to raise an issue accompanied by statements or evidence sufficient to afford the decision maker and the parties an opportunity to respond to the issue precludes appeal based on that issue. Prior to the conclusion of the initial evidentiary hearing, any participant may request an opportunity to present additional testimony, arguments, or evidence regarding the application. The Planning Commission shall grant such requests by continuing the public hearing or leaving the record open for additional written testimony, arguments, or evidence. Persons who testify shall first receive recognition from the chair, state their full name, mailing address, and if appearing in a representative capacity, identify whom they represent. Is there a presentation by the applicant? Welcome forward.
Good evening. Thank you so much for having us. I'm Jane Deitwig and
Stephen Deitwig.
And we live at 1230 Kessler Boulevard, Longview, Washington, as well as Post Office Box 94, Savannah. We are, very well said, you have the packet, and I think that we're requesting a variance for no more increase of actual site and footprint is the word I'm looking for. Thank you. And we're just going up, adding a bathroom and more space upstairs. So there is a 4-inch on the southeast corner, as was noted, 4-inch over toward the setback, incursion on the setback. There's in the packet, you will see that there is a document from our neighbors that they are totally fine with that. Some other neighbors have also, which I was happy to see when I looked at the packet, have also responded to. Our whole goal in all of this is to, which I know is yours too, which is what has been the charm of Cannon Beach, is we, instead of tearing down the cabin and starting over, and we knew it was going to be some nightmares as we continued, but that's what we want. We want to maintain, preserve the historical value and the character of the cabin for Cannon Beach. And we know that you recognize and encourage that. So we aren't interested in, we have a fairly large lot, and we're just keeping our small cabin on that, and people are charmed by it, and we would like to make it a little bit more livable for us too. So thank you very much. That's all I have to say.
Covers everything.
So
Are there questions? Go ahead.
Oh, I had a question. So the initial part of the staff report indicated that the carport was within that 5-foot setback. Is that, I was kind of confused with some of the emails going back and forth in the packet and whether or not that was determined.
Resolved that it really isn't.
So it is just the southeast corner, the carport on the north side is not.
I don't think that was ever firmly established. I've never seen a survey or any kind of information indicating exactly where that is. The contractor designer provided me, shall we say, changing information as I was interacting with him. So he kept kind of shifting things a little bit. So I don't believe that the northern bit was ever established. However, since there's no change, again, I believe through the setback reduction that these setbacks on either side, north or south, can be addressed through this application.
Okay, yeah, I was unclear in the email correspondence going back and forth. It was unclear on whether or not the carport was correct.
In 2017, we remodeled the downstairs. At that point, that's when the survey was done. And at that point, also the 4 inches were there, and because it was the way that it's set on the lot in the southeast corner. And it's the way that it's set on the lot originally in the 1939 or whenever it was built. So, but that was not an issue at the time, and getting the permit from is another contractor to do the downstairs. So if we were to have to do anything, it's destroying what we've already done in 2017 when we approved.
I had a question, and I'll ask this question at this point because I think it's important. It is something that's on my mind. I suspect it's on my fellow commissioner's mind. And I want to have a conversation about it. Once we close the record, it's really a conversation between us.
Sure.
And you don't have an opportunity to respond. So I want you to know it's on my mind, and I want to offer you the opportunity to respond.
Sure.
Anytime we see a situation where someone doesn't apply for a permit, it automatically raises our level of concern about the application. I saw here that work was started before a permit was issued. Can you talk to us a little bit about what happened there? Why not?
It's probably ignorance on our part because we did not know that, and that's kind of why you have a contractor, but I mean, we put the trust there in that he did know building, but I know that he was tearing into it to see what needed to be done as far as supports. He was concerned about the
Conditions underneath.
the conditions underneath, and so in going up, what could they do a truss system? And so that's what, and they were going into the walls to see what needed to be done. And no building was done. And I didn't know, I mean, I am ignorant on that, and so that's, I know, bad on us, I guess, but we trusted the fact that,
The contractor knew.
the contractor knew, and I know he applied, but it doesn't sound like it was in the right order. When I hear building permit, I just had confidence in him that,
Right.
and I knew he wasn't doing any building. He was tearing into it, is what he was doing.
Great, thank you very much. Are there other questions?
Oh, I can clarify on your question as well. A permit application, a building permit application had been filed by the contractor and he started demolition work. However, the demolition work, the level of work he was doing at that point in time was work that did require a permit to have been issued. So it seemed that he put the cart ahead of the horse a little bit.
That's helpful.
I think that's what happened,
Yeah, that's helpful.
and now we've missed all this beautiful weather for building, which has been
Yeah,
not being able to use our cabin, so a little bit of victims, but we want to go forward as hopefully.
There was a discussion with staff that enough information wasn't submitted and they moved forward prior to getting the information that needed to be submitted. And we didn't have enough information to make these determinations, and the information was requested. And the assumption was made that there wasn't going to be an issue, and the assumption was incorrect.
I think I get it. Thank you very much. Are there other questions? Great. If you don't have any further testimony, thank you very much.
Okay.
Are there do you have anybody representing you here tonight that you'd like to have come forward?
No,
Just us.
I'll ask formally, but thank you.
I appreciate that. So, we'll get on the road back to Longview, but, will we know if there has to be a continuance or that?
Right here, we're gonna go through this in the next 10 minutes.
Oh,
Yeah, we'll have a decision here for you.
Okay.
we can, all
Not with us.
Yeah, hang out.
right,
If you can hang out till 9 o'clock, it won't be 9 o'clock tonight. You can hang out with us all night if you want, but we will have a decision here for you.
It's interesting.
Thanks. Okay, are there other presentations? I've asked this, but I'm going to stay to format other presentations by the applicant or their representatives. I heard no. Are there presentations by proponents of? Okay, are there any is there anyone who'd like to speak in opposition to this request? Okay, no. You have one more opportunity to respond to anything that's been said or add anything you don't think you have. If you'd like to come forward this time, you can. If you're satisfied with everything, we'll close the record at this point, and then it will move to our consideration of what you presented. Anything further? Okay, then we're going to close the public testimony and go to consideration. Thank you. Anybody want to start?
Well, I've got to say, I do appreciate the idea of keeping a small cabin in Cannon Beach. So kudos to that. I personally, for the 0.85 foot, I think it's not a problem since the footprint's not changing, but I liked the conversation we had about process. I think that's absolutely critical, and we do need to be sure that contractors pay attention to timelines and requests for information before they start work, so.
That's something for not this any kind of in-depth conversation, but something for a discussion, whether we're talking about trees, wetlands, what have you, contractors and how they act in our city. I can tell you anytime I see that a contractor going what might be perceived as off the rails or rogue, automatically gets my hackles up. And, you know, if we have contractors that aren't following our code, maybe we have a way to check them a little bit, but a conversation for maybe another night. Go ahead, Steve.
It's an internal conversation we have. You know, it's unfortunate. It's not conversations we'd like to have, but they were had, and that's why it's brought to you today. It was because that process was followed. Information was put out to the contractor. That information was needed. So it happens. I'm not saying we can't do better, but you know, I thought the staff did what was required in order to address this issue. The stop work order was put on there to get the decision done. So I can't say it's the best for everyone involved. We prefer not to be in these situations, but I thought it was addressed as appropriately as possible.
I really appreciate that staff did do that rather than turning a blind eye or smoothing things over. So thank you for holding the line on what our code requires.
I know when I first joined this commission a long time ago, there was some people thought you don't give an inch. I've never felt that way, in terms of properties, especially something built in 1930 that has a pretty cool aesthetic. I like the way that carport hangs over there. It'd be a shame to see it gone or a saw come and buzz at it. So I don't have an issue with the request. I voiced my concern about the process. Have anything feel differently about that?
No, not really.
I just had to consider making sure that if it is an incursion on the north side, because the survey seems to be ambiguous about whether or not it is, that's covered, that the footprint doesn't change.
Mhm.
'Cause I mean, that's their request is to not change the footprint, just to do the work. So I don't know if we need to add that as part of the.
Yeah.
part
That's
of the motion.
reasonable. I would support that.
Okay.
So that would just be a condition of approval that the footprint remain in the existing, or the carport remain in the same footprint as it is today.
The building structure and the
Building and
carport structure.
Yeah, however you think
Yeah.
you'd like to condition that.
Okay, Eric,
Yeah, I'd like to post a motion if do we have any other discussions?
No, actually, I completely agree, and I think that is exactly what they are offering. Change the footprint, so I
Yeah.
can imagine.
I can't imagine there'd be opposition from I'd like to make a motion to approve the setback with the additional condition that the building and the carport remain with the same size footprint in the same location.
Second.
Third.
okay, any further discussion? No? Okay, Tessa, will you call the roll, please?
Commissioner Bates,
Yes.
Commissioner Sinclair,
Yes.
Commissioner Matusek,
Yes.
Commissioner Moore,
Yes.
Commissioner Ostrander,
Yes.
Chair Newton.
Yes. Setback reduction is approved. Good luck with your project.
Could I just take a minute real quick? So there's still some time that we have to do some paperwork to put out the approval. And then the contractor will continue to need to department to get things like that. So he still needs to do some paperwork before he can start. So just make sure he's talking to our building department.
You can do that right away, or do you need?
Once.
Early next week, we have to finish the orders, have the chair sign them, and then we can go forward. That'd be sometime early next.
Thank you.
Okay.
I think at this time we'll we'll continue the meeting. Our next item is also a quasi judicial hearing, a continuation of CU 2401 Stephanie N LLC requesting a conditional use permit. Continuation of CU 2401 Miller Nash LLP on behalf of Stephanie N LLC requesting a conditional use permit for the purpose of replacing the deteriorating beachfront protective structure. Property is located at 2740 Pacific Avenue, tax lot 5200, 5300, 5400, map 510, 31 AD, in a residential motel RM zone. Request will be reviewed against the criteria of the municipal code, chapter 17.80, conditional uses. The June Planning Commission hearing, it was decided to proceed with an open record scheduled that allowed for submitted additional written testimony, including final written argument. At this point, the record for this proceeding is closed. The record will reopen for limited purposes of allowing the chair to poll the commission for any conflicts of interest, personal bias, or ex parte contacts. Does any member believe they have a personal bias, ex parte contact, or conflict of interest? No? No. Does anyone object to the jurisdiction of the planning commission to hear this matter at this time? Does any commission member believe he or she has, well, I asked this, we'll ask it again, I guess, a conflict of interest or personal bias? We talked about that. No. Has any commission member talked about that? Does anyone in the audience wish to ask any commissioner about these disclosures? No hands. At this point, we'll again close the public hearing regarding commission disclosures and proceed with deliberation. Okay. I'd like to start.
We can start with some general thoughts. I really appreciated all of the further comment we received. I think it was helpful that the record remained open. I think I am still left basically questioning why we are looking at this now, because don't see evidence in the record that this failed. I know there's discussion of disrepair, but actually it's working at the moment. Trying to understand a more armored approach. I was out looking again today and it's such a nice in between state right now, to be honest. It's got a lot of vegetation. Yes, there's some loose rocks that should be removed, but I don't feel as though we're in a state where we are actually looking at a failing structure that needs to be replaced. I would love to hear thoughts on whether it makes sense at this point to be talking about a more armored structure than what is in existence at this moment.
Back where it was, or to get it off the beach, or?
I think get it off the beach. Once it's gone, it's not functioning, but yet there's been no incursion of waves. And I know there was a discussion of these rocks being dangerous, but it's not like the rocks are jumping off of the cliffs, out of the riprap in the middle of a sunny day. What happens is in a very high tide, when there is nobody on the beach, there is some water coming in and washing a rock out now and then. Yes, those need to be removed because it's basically littering the beach, but it's not a danger at that point because there's no one present when we have those high tides. So I'm not looking at it as a physical danger. So my next question is, why are we discussing placing this, which will be a much more armored structure? When you look at the one next door at Ocean Lodge, it's got massive rocks. They're not vegetated. It's going to create more wave force bouncing off the vegetated structure that has some rocks behind it. So I think we're actually talking about not just replacing with same, we're talking about replacing this structure with something that will create more of an armored coastline and currently exists in front of the Stephanie Inn.
So my understanding of their application is that it's the same style of structure that we approved on the house that's.
The days,
Yeah.
which I actually am concerned that we made a mistake, honestly, in approving that too soon.
So the structure that's at that house now, when I was looking at it in comparison to what Stephanie currently has and what Ocean Lodge has and everything up and down the coast, there's the armored structure that's buried that provides the backbone, the structural integrity to the hillside that's there. And then it's covered with the sand and vegetation with the intention that the vegetation will then flourish and do its thing. I don't know how that would be more armored than besides the fact that it would be now be in better repair.
But it would be more armored because I think there would be more structure behind it that's going to create resistance to a wave that comes. So one of the effects of having an armored coastline is you actually get more force as the waves bounce off of a hard structure than soft vegetated earth structure. And that's part of why OPRD is always required that there be a process of trying less armored approaches first, which hasn't been tried here. So
this is a less armored approach than what was initially installed that's failing. Is what was initially installed that was there is just what they have at Ocean Lodge with the.
So the one at Ocean Lodge is the modern kind with a much larger rock.
Yeah.
So I do think that that's actually a different type of structure than this one. When you look at the size of these rocks, it looks to me like it is more, it's not a cobble berm, but it's closer to that concept of a little softer structure that's not going to create quite as much bounce back. I'm not an expert, but I'm perceiving it.
I'm not an expert either, but I believe that the way that their expert represented it is that what Stephanie Inn has now is an older style and that it's no longer being done that way. That what you see down the beach may be more representative of what anybody would do for
for an armored structure.
An armored structure. They've gone away from the smaller stones to bigger ones.
Yes.
But
Also, I recall in response to your question, the attorney for the applicant, for Stephanie, was advised that the structure is gonna fail. When is a good question. Could be tomorrow, could be a year.
Could be 20 years.
Yeah, but nobody knows. So my personal opinion is, I hate to compound previous mistakes with new ones, but this case, we've approved this once, riprap, but whatever it was, I'm gonna go back to the old originalist comments in the stream, whatever it was armored at the time, and they're saying it's failing. It could be catastrophic, we don't know. And we just want to update with the technology that represents what, that is intended to be the best technology existing today as we did back then. So I can't second guess somebody that says, we've been told that it could be tomorrow, it could be a year, it could be 20 years, but we have a problem.
So I think there are two things that concern me about looking at it that way. One is, I do question whether we're compounding a mistake. This was approved in 99 before people were thinking about the impacts of the coastline. And we do have state agencies that have come and spoken to us as a body, unfortunately, after we approved the day's riprap. They made it very clear that there should be a progression of trying something else first. And second, I think that we are looking at an instance where this riprap failed specifically because there was not appropriate maintenance.
That could be.
And if we have an individual who is not an individual, a company that failed to maintain the first time, do we reward that by saying, go ahead and build again with more armor when we have a more enlightened view? We now understand that there are alternatives that should be tried first. So my question is, yes, I think we are compounding a mistake. Do we wish to do that? Do we wish to say that because we have one riprap for one home, we now need to approve every riprap petition or application that comes?
I've heard you posit the argument before that riprap jeopardizes property adjacent to the riprap. Right now, since Stephanie has been informed that they have a failing berm and they have a brand new riprap, which I don't ever recall reviewing in my time, right next to it with huge boulders. So not only is he being told that you have a problem, I don't know when, but we've compounded it already over here. They've got double trouble. With what is that, Oregon Lodge? Is that what it's called?
Ocean Lodge.
Ocean Lodge, yeah.
The challenge there, Mike, is, if you take that logic and you run it all the way down the beach,
Pretty
pretty
soon.
soon we've just got an armored beach.
Well, we do. If you walk it,
PRD is saying we don't have a beach after that.
We-
If we armor it, we lose the beach. That's my concern.
we could lose the beach to erosion from storms coming up too, and we lose buildings that way.
We could a lot of things, but we have been told.
But also, I think that the question is, who's the priority here? Is the priority the people who have homes who chose to build on oceanfront? Or is the priority thinking about the beach as a continuous habitat and a space for the public? Every time that we talk about erosion issues, we are focusing on homeowners. Why do we give them the priority over the goal 18 idea of preserving beaches for the public? There's been no conversation about that piece.
And you're right.
And when we see, for instance, there was a comment from the attorney that, we don't have to worry because there's too much sand in Cannon Beach. No, actually, with sea level rise, the more sand that we can get, the better. This is what's going to save the beach for the public. So this is my soapbox, but honestly, we are not taking a holistic view of the community interest. We are taking a very landowner and privileged landowner view when we say that's our priority, the people who own those properties.
Except that they're all riprapped along that.
They're not all.
Seafront, except for 5 properties that I saw. I might have missed a couple. But, yeah.
So
I don't disagree. I just think, telling them, we need to be clear now that we're not going to do anything as the sea level rises. Because that's an option, or, get ahead of this and figure out how we preserve as much property as we can, knowing that things are going to change quickly. And I don't know what the right answer is. I really don't. I mean, this is a tough question.
I could not see, or I could not find. I completely understand that the desire of the state folks and generally all of us is we would wish there weren't any riprap. I get that. But I didn't really see anything that I thought said that I had, I guess I should say, the obligation to take a property that clearly met the time requirements for having hard surfacing. Stephanie Ann's been there longer than January 177, whatever goal that is. And I really couldn't convince myself that we either had the requirement or even the authority to push back to something lesser.
So that requirement does not mean you get armoring automatically. It means that you can do shoreline stabilization. And under our code 1780, I'm getting too farsighted, 230 D1, there still is a priority for shoreline structures. So that does exist in our code, that we are supposed to consider that priority. It does not mean that just because you were in existence in 1977, you're allowed to have riprap. It means that you could if you also meet the criteria in our municipal code.
So how would they meet or not meet? Because I
So-
recall it just says the least necessary.
Right. And so the question is, was there enough in the geologist's report cited by the applicant to state that they could not use a lower level of armoring? And what the report said was essentially, it would take a lot of maintenance. It's not going to be as good, but it didn't say it wouldn't work. And maintenance was a central piece of geologist's report in terms of why this wasn't going to be the right fit. To me, that's not part of the criteria here. There's nothing that says you have to pick the thing that doesn't have maintenance.
No, and I'm not promoting that. I was simply trying to put it in a framework to where,
Meet criteria.
yeah, I mean, what would our rationale be to say, no, you can't do armoring of any kind. You need to try something of a lesser impact. And, do we really have that authority? I hear clearly you believe we do. But, since I'm not an expert, I read quite a bit. I thought of detail that, that made me think that this was not the appropriate place to try to get rid of riprap. I'm not the expert though.
That's probably one of the, this particular application, we don't have an unbiased view. We have a geologist report paid for by the applicant. And I noticed that the attorney's rebuttal was a little bit snide about, well, why should we listen to Friends of the Dunes or Ocean Shores because they don't have an expert? Well, it's also kind of disconcerting that the only expert we have was paid by. And so how do we balance that? And that's an open question.
I tried and tried. I could not find that and I can't remember the name of the company that provided expert opinion. They don't do burritos, as far as I can tell. They were very much structural experts.
Yes.
And so, if you have a hammer, that's what you do.
That's my concern.
And I can't dispute that. I do have a concern though, in this particular case, if we were to go with you need to put vegetative type, revetment up. And it's bounded on both sides by a hardscape. I mean, I believe that you're focusing energy on that weaker point. And that's just an opinion based on what I saw in Galveston when the hurricane came. So it's hardly a expert opinion.
Aaron?
I'm here. I'm just super slow on the
Sure.
mute button. I think Mickey makes a good point in if this has been if we're here today because of a lack of maintenance, I don't see I don't see how we reward them with a new armored structure here if they're able to maintain the property better moving forward and still achieve the same result. Now, I guess the caveat to that is if it fails this year, for example, because their geologist says that it's failing, if it fails this year, how long will it take them to actually come back to us to rebuild it? I mean, that if it's going to take another year or 3 and they're left without any type of protection, then I think there's a much bigger issue there. But if there's some emergency process or a fast track to rebuilding it once it fails, then I'm with Mickey in that let's go with a less is more here and protect the public access rather than rewarding arguably bad behavior.
And I suppose your question then, both you and Aaron, less is a burrito or less could be repair what you have. Are you okay with repair what you have?
Sure.
Yeah, a condition of the approval of that is it had to be repaired.
Yeah.
It hasn't, but it needed to have been done.
Okay. That had been done.
It has not been, repair has not been done to that.
Okay.
Revetment. It was a requirement of the approval that it be done and it wasn't met.
Okay. So if we ask them to do the repair as opposed to giving them.
Well, I don't think we'd ask them to do a repair. We would just say,
No.
do what you said you were gonna do. And we want that as a condition, we're either gonna approve it or not.
Yeah, so if we don't approve it, they have the option to repair because that is an existing structure that doesn't need us to approve the new structure.
Okay. Okay.
Steve, go ahead.
That's not true. If they would have the opportunity to repair, we wouldn't be having this discussion. The wall is too far gone and it's the decision that it's a new structure. So there is not the opportunity to repair what's there. And the option is to come in to build a new structure.
Whose opinion was it that it was too far gone?
Staff's.
Staff.
Because the geologist said that he didn't really look underneath the vegetation, so he didn't have a detailed description of the structure underneath.
It was based on our just site inspections and what we see there, that it's hard to say repair if,
We visited the site with OPRD.
Yeah.
And came to the conclusion that that there was not enough existing fabric to repair.
And the fabric would hold the new plantings?
By fabric, I'm talking the fabric of the structure, i.e. material.
So is that the, both staff and OPRD are in consensus about that it would be a replacement to do anything?
Right, that's why they're here.
Okay.
Because that was the consensus.
And what was their opinion of what is there to protect the property?
That we're looking at a new structure because it's too far gone.
We didn't, and I don't want to get into potentially introducing new information, but that wasn't a topic of discussion as far as the viability of what's currently there.
Right.
Okay.
The theme that we just start touching on whether trees or wetlands or any of these things that we just don't have independent specialists.
Yeah.
To give us an unpaid opinion on this stuff. It just makes it brutally hard.
So I have walked up and down the beach. I'm sure most of us have and have taken several looks over time at some of the vegetative revetments. And they talk about one that worked really well that's, just north, closer to the rock. And then they refer to one that's not working very well. Do you get is the consensus that the reason that those are not the ones that aren't performing, is it because of maintenance?
That's my feeling.
Yes.
And I think there's intentional. I think in some cases, and this is my own personal opinion, in some cases, let it tank so we can get the riprap. And I think we as a body need to be very careful. If this body feels that we need to approve what's been put in front of them, we need to be very careful, more so than we've seen in the past, about oversight. Because the oversight on these projects is nil.
Well, certainly the long term.
The long and short, there's nothing out there on this stuff. I mean, everybody's pointing at everybody else and you can't get a clear message. So,
My take on that is gonna be the applicant's responsibility.
But they have a reverse incentive. And that's the.
I understand that, but they need to know going in what the expectation is if they come here without taking care of it. And I think that message is starting to become clear.
and yet here we are with a ball.
Right. Yeah, I can't speak to that, you know, I mean, obviously each year is different. I mean, it is riprap, they have the vegetative cover over it.
I was gonna ask how much of it is lack of maintenance and how much of it is the technology or the style of installation in the first place just wasn't appropriate to properly protect it.
It might be a little bit of both.
Yeah, but my sense is.
Because that might have been the technology at the time.
Yeah, but I do not believe the structure was maintained because I don't think that riprap everywhere is failing after 25 years, even from the late 90s.
I remember that the applicant spent some time discussing this exact location and how it's the lowest spot of any of the oceanfront lots. And, you know, I guess describing it in a very in extreme location. And I guess in a sense as justification for our based revetment. Do we agree with that, or can we just say what happened anywhere along our coast is representative of that spot? I mean, that clearly isn't the way that Stephanie N feels about it.
Maybe, you know.
I don't have an answer, but
come back with, 97 and 98 were La Nina years, and we had a higher wave action, so they approved the plan because it was just, they got beat up during those storms. We don't know because we don't have an independent opinion. Could be, might be.
I'm not asking for, anybody to predict the future. But if we were to require a lesser protection and then it failed, do we, the city, bear any responsibility for that? Versus letting them do what they've asked because we understand that's the strongest protection.
If we were to go under that philosophy, there would be riprap on every beachfront property. Because everyone would say, well, we need the strongest so that it will never fail.
But doesn't, I guess, Goal 18 say that you cannot do riprap anywhere unless you had an existing structure? I mean, there's a lot of places, as I appreciate it, that will never be an issue because the state's already said isn't going to be anymore.
Sadly, here in Cannon Beach, there's many structures that were here at that time. So we do need to think, what does this mean going forward? Do we go straight to riprap or do we follow what our code says, which is that there needs to be clear evidence that a lesser armored structure will not work? And I personally do not see evidence in this record that a lesser armored structure would not work. It happens that we are faced with a property that had riprap at a time that was approved at a time when I don't think that this hierarchy was really in the picture. So we don't know. And I don't feel so the geologist said it absolutely would not work. The geologist said, well, it's not as strong because of course it's not as strong, but would it still work is a question that wasn't answered. And yes, there's going to be maintenance. In fact, there should have been maintenance even on this riprap that would occur.
We read the language to make sure it's clear and objective. We're concerned with any of that. Have you, Mickey?
Looking at our code as the code that exists right now that we follow, didn't question, is it clear and objective? Because it's not our job to rewrite the code. If it's not clear and objective, our job is to apply the code that exists.
I agree with that, but I thought I heard the word necessary.
So
Somewhere.
excuse me,
Go ahead.
the clear and objective obligation applies to housing.
That's right. Thank you. Okay, thank you.
So if we look at the qualifications, we would have to show, so it says that shoreline stabilization beds for beachfront protection shall be permitted only if there's a critical need to protect property threatened by erosion hazard, impacts property are minimized, visual impacts are minimized, the beach is maintained, long-term or recurring costs to the public are avoided, riparian vegetation is preserved. So I think A is our only real question. We would have to find this, that there's a critical need to protect property that is threatened by erosion hazard. That property seems to currently be protected. So I'm wondering, is there a critical need to protect structure there? It's may not be in good repair, but it's not currently eroding. The property is not in danger.
I'm willing to request as an invasive or intrusive solution to this. I would guess that they will come back shortly.
It'll be appealed for sure.
Yeah, I think with something like this, it needs to be pretty clean. It's a yes or a no.
Yeah.
If it's a yes, yeah, I would have qualifications, but I'm not convinced that we've been shown those alternative options aren't viable and that what's there isn't doing what it's supposed to be doing.
And just to note, 1780-230 states the shoreline protection structure shall be the minimum necessary to provide the level of protection required. So our question is this proposal the minimum necessary?
Yeah, there's kind of two questions. Well, there's two questions. One, how did we determine what that minimum level is? And then the question about how reliable is the expert testimony that we've been provided? Because, that being what they have at least represented is pretty clear. Say that we don't have a choice but to do a replacement. And unfortunately, I don't have the ability to question the accuracy of their expert. I mean, it's simply out of my ballpark.
So does that mean that the city has to hire a geologist every time an application like this comes before us so that we do have an expert and we can all stop saying that we're not experts? Clearly, we're not experts. So do we have to come up with some plan to hire a geologist every time that we receive an application like this?
I think it's a really good question. Maybe not one for tonight, Aaron, but certainly on my mind as we look at the different sections of the municipal code that we're modifying. And don't want to dive too deep, but we talked about these, maybe covering some of that, but maybe for another night.
Yeah, and so right now we have their geologist, which clearly has their point of view, and it's time for us to decide so that, I agree with Mickey, they will appeal this if it doesn't go their way. So, Clay, I don't know if this is your turn or what, but are we ready to vote?
If you're ready to put up a motion, I welcome you to do that. You can have further discussion if there's a second.
Second. Oh, did he not?
There's no motion on the table. No. Aaron, do you have a motion?
Well, I'm going to defer to Mickey because she's probably thought this out a little bit more in terms of, what holds up on an appeal, but my motion would simply be to deny the request. I'm pretty blunt and straightforward, so that would be it for me. But if we should elaborate on that, I haven't thought that out.
Mickey, you have spent some time on this. Do you
Yeah.
feel like there's a,
But when, Carrie,
Carrie, did you have something to say?
I just wanted, before a motion's made, I just wanted to suggest to the commission that it sounds like you're moving towards a denial. We don't have written findings that would memorialize the planning commission's decision for in the event of appeal, and I would encourage you to for us to have those. So I think Steve has a schedule that would allow for a tentative decision. I've taken lots of notes during your deliberation, and I'd be happy to work with Steve to draft some findings if you made a tentative decision of denial tonight. And we could come back with findings for your adoption at a special meeting in the near term so that we can meet the September 25th, 20-day limit, given the notice of decision and appeal timelines.
Okay,
Yeah.
I think the tentative discussion, I don't know whether we have a denial here or not, but I do think tentative is something to consider. Go ahead, Steve.
Yeah, just to echo a little bit what Carrie's saying is, depending on the decision that's made this evening, we would recommend, that the plan commission have staff draft findings based on that 120-day clock. We're going to need to have a special meeting.
Yeah.
On what is it, Monday, July 30th or July 30th to get those adopted, or Tuesday. We got to get those signed on the 31st because there are lots of things coming up. I'm going to have to say I have special meetings with councils, things like that, if the application was to get appealed. So if whatever decision the plan commission makes this evening, I would recommend that you have staff draft the findings and that we have a special meeting to adopt those findings on July 30th, if everyone can meet that. So it's something to think about. We've oftentimes done that by Zoom.
yeah, but we could do it in the afternoon.
Yeah, good point there. Okay, so whatever we
Yep.
forward, it's tentative with us meeting July 30th in the afternoon, so we don't impose on our
Right.
joint session. Okay. We have a first, actually, Aaron, based on what we've just heard, you want to amend it to have that be a tentative?
I agree with the tentative.
Okay, we'll call that the motion then. It's a tentative denial.
Seconded.
And we have a second. Is there further discussion?
So what are the findings of fact going to likely be?
So it'll be related to 1780-230 D1, E1, and L, those requirements, and whether those were met by the material in the record.
Okay.
Obviously, our findings would be that they're not met for each one of those sections.
Right.
You guys feel like you have a pretty good summary of?
Yeah, and that would be regardless of whether the decision was for or against.
Because that is.
Those are the sections where we're for.
Yeah,
That's
makes
correct.
sense. And I guess I was thinking, just to make sure I understood that, really what we're doing is we're saying that we're not convinced a lesser impactful revetment is. I don't.
Is not.
You know what I mean. Anyway, we're not debating whether or not it should be done now anymore, I guess, because the city and OPRD has already looked at it and it sounded like they were in. It's really only specific to the type of revetment.
I think that's right.
I mean, I'm just wanting to understand.
Yeah, that's important clarity.
The type in the process to get there.
Clear process and do.
Going option A to the hardest, most extreme option that we go.
Right.
Exploring.
Our own code requirement. use the least possible.
Through a progression, yes. Yeah. Okay, any further discussion? Tessa, will you call the roll, please?
Commissioner Sinclair.
I had to be first, huh? Yes.
Commissioner Morris.
Yes.
Commissioner Matusek.
Yes.
Commissioner Ostrander.
Yes.
Commissioner Bates.
Yes.
Chair Newton.
Yes. Additional use permit, denied. Okay, let's move on.
So I'll probably be touching base with everyone next day or so. We've done those oftentimes by Zoom. I don't know if it would be better later in the afternoon, or if anyone has some ideas as to what type of time frame it might help us to be able to. We have to provide 24 hours of notice, so I'd like to get it in the afternoon to give us some time to put these findings together, A, and then B, have enough time to put a 24-hour notice in. So I don't know if we can do it later in the afternoon on Tuesday, but that certainly would be a preference.
How about before our joint session at 5:30, would you guys be able to be here at that point? I mean, I know Aaron has probably a difficulty, but.
I was planning on joining remotely, but that shouldn't stop us from having, we could have this format.
Okay. All right.
And if need be, I can. A lot of bodies.
The later in the day works better. I have to meet. I have an appointment in Portland that I'm doing that morning.
5:30 work for you, Steve?
On the 30th.
They're gonna be setting up
Yeah.
and things like that.
Okay.
Ahead of time. I mean, if we could do it 5:15, 4 o'clock, anytime in
What if,
there.
what if we just plan the standard Zoom
Yeah.
findings so that we don't have to get everyone physically here?
Yeah, I'm good with that. I just didn't know if there was a time that was better than others.
Yeah.
I'm good.
Would have like a 4 o'clock or something,
With your
I
schedule?
think I can work 4 o'clock. Yeah.
because like I said, the more time I can have
Yeah.
later in the afternoon to put things together, both notice wise and the document.
Go ahead.
If I can, we're talking about July 30th.
July 30th.
Council will be in here. Probably 5 o'clock. And it's 6 o'clock, but there's probably gonna be an exec session, and that would start at 5.
4 o'clock,
Fine.
4 o'clock, okay?
As long as you're up by
4:30?
45, yeah. 4:30.
Yeah, okay.
4
We
p.m.
should be able to do that.
Okay, so what did we decide? What time?
4 o'clock for findings.
4 PM fine. Okay, that's the 30.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, move to our next item. Our next item is also a quasi judicial hearing regarding appeal of 2401 City Council remand of the Planning Commission's decision of S 2401. City Council remand of the Planning Commission's decision of SR 2401. Brent Burton requests a setback reduction to reduce the required front and side yard setbacks in order to construct a single-family dwelling, undeveloped lot located near the intersection of South Hemlock and Center Streets. Subject property tax lot 4302, map 51030DD is located in a residential RL zone. The request will be reviewed under Municipal Code Section 17.64010, setback reduction provisions established. Does anyone object to the jurisdiction of the Planning Commission to hear this matter at this time? Does any commission member believe he or she has a conflict of interest or a personal bias? Has any commission member had any ex parte contact? Okay. May we have, let's see, do we need to add anything on the staff report?
Yes, yeah. I'm not gonna go through the whole thing, but I'm here to answer any questions. I'm gonna touch base on some of the new information and some of the criteria. So I'll just go a little bit of the history and some of the information. So in March of this year, Plan Commission heard the setback reduction by Mr. Burton, and at that time, the Plan Commission denied the request. Mr. Burton requested appealed that decision to the Common Council, to the City Council. And in June, the council heard that appeal, and based on some of the information as part of that hearing, the council remanded that appeal back to the Plan Commission for further consideration. There was information that they thought heard by the Plan Commission again. Since the council remand, the applicant has submitted a number of additional materials to the records, and these materials include a new setback reduction application form and narrative addressing the setback reduction criteria, site photographs, a geotechnical report dated October 22nd based on conceptual site plan showing the setback reduction, a June 3rd, 2024 letter from the geologic engineer stating although setback reduction is acceptable, additional evaluation and geotechnical recommendations may be recommended once detailed design drawings are prepared. A letter from Bob McEwen, Construction Inc., representatives indicating the setback reduction will not impact the city's ability to repair and improve the water main in Hemlock Street. A letter from a representative of homeowner to the west expressing concerns over the development on steep slopes. Map of development showing topographic lines, and a letter from Larry Waters, PE MSC, explaining that the reducing the setback will not put Hemlock Street water line at risk. As the Plan Commission is aware, the applicant is requesting a setback reduction for the required front yard from 15 feet to 5 feet for the construction of a new single-family dwelling. Applicant indicates that setback reduction is needed to allow the house to be built on a portion of the lot that is less steep and will have less impact into the hillside, and also to meet the requirements for no parking or access on Hemlock Street. The subject property has a parcel average slope in excess of 30%, and the applicant's intent is to construct the house on portions of the lot with the least slope in order to minimize geotechnical impacts. The application materials include a conceptual house plan and site perspectives, site plan showing the topographic lines and proposed building envelopes. The applicable criteria include the RL lower residential lower density zoning district standards and the setback reduction standards of section 17.64. With regards to the RL, the residential lower density district, the staff comment was conceptual plan showing the proposed location of the residence driveway and off-street parking have been provided. The proposed site plan also includes information about topography and shows elevation lines. With regards to the setback reduction, 17.64, based on the original information of the setback reduction application and testimony at the hearing on March 28th, Plan Commission found that there was insufficient information to determine that the applicant met several of the criteria in 17.64, specifically sections A2, A4, and A5. I'll go through those specifically what they mean in A2. The criterion requires that the applicant ensure that significant views of the ocean, mountains, or similar features from nearby properties will not be obstructed any more than would occur if proposed structure was located as required by the zoning district. Section A4, this criterion requires the application for the setback reduction to achieve one or more of 8 specified objectives. As originally submitted, the applicant asserted that the setback reduction would achieve both AB4 and ABE, and which is to protect the neighboring property's views and to permit construction on a lot with unusual configuration. The commission found that the adjustment would not achieve the view protection as discussed. On remand, the application's narrative has been revised to explain that the reduction will achieve the following 3 objectives. The tree protection of neighboring properties' view, and permitting the construction on a lot with unusual configuration. Criteria 10.5, this criterion requires an applicant to demonstrate that the adjacent rights-of-way have sufficient width for the utility placement and public purpose. There's some information there by both the applicant as well as staff regarding their beliefs with regards to those situations. And then the criteria 10.6 is details the reduction would not create traffic hazards or impinge upon public walkway or trail. And then the last item for discussion is noted in 17.50 development requirements for potential geologic hazard areas. And staff notes that this section authorizes a city to require compliance with these standards as part of a setback reduction request rather than a building permit. Assuming the plan commission is inclined to require this concurrent review, the criteria for consideration are set forth in that particular section. So the recommendation, the plan commission originally denied the setback reduction. Sharing some of the planning commission's concerns, the council remanded Mr. Burton's appeal back to plan commission in order to give the applicant an opportunity to provide additional evidence. Staff does not believe that the additional evidence supports granting the setback reduction or, if required, the geologic hazard area development requirements.
Steve, can I ask for, or did they approve a 120-day extension?
Yes, they did. I don't have it in front of me, but yes, as part of the remand, the council required the applicant to extend that. The applicant submitted documentation that he was willing to do that. I don't have it right in front of me. I can find it, but I know that October, thank you. So yes, the answer is yes, and the 120 is extended to October 26th.
And the other thing I had a question about is I thought the first time we saw it was simply a back or front yard setback, but there is now a side yard setback on this?
It is, it's kind of a street side yard, so it's
Oh, okay.
it's still the same.
Okay, I got it. Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay.
One of the things that we got this evening or this afternoon was an email from, I guess, Mr. Burton, dated July 19th, where he is requesting if we can move the hearing date. Is that part
I
of?
thought what we might do on that, Steve, go ahead.
I don't know. I'm just curious if that's something
I saw the same thing and had the same question. I thought what we might do is, I see Mr. Burton is here tonight, offer him the opportunity to present his testimony on this and then ask that question where we're at on that request for continuance, just for clarity.
And I could comment, there was a response back, just kind of indicating that the continuance request would have to be done at the hearing. And I didn't hear back. There was some specifics in terms of what staff had sent back was that it in order to grant such a request, and this would be something we would talk about if at the time of continuance, is that the extension of the 120-day clock of 60 additional days for a hearing in September. So that would be something that if there is the discussion on a continuance, that we may want to do that for 60 days and have that specific date, but we'd want to make sure that that 120-day clock was part of that extension.
You said 60 days there.
To the September, because there's reference to both August and September and
okay.
And there.
And that was a suggestion from staff. I didn't know there's a lot of information here. And instead of just, having it open, I just thought I'd put a specific date certain.
Okay. Is there any additional correspondence beyond what we've been?
I don't believe so. I think you have everything.
Okay, great. Well, then we'll move to the public testimony. The pertinent criteria to be considered are noted in the staff reports and listed on the criteria sheets on the meeting page of the city's website. Testimony, arguments, and evidence must be directed toward those criteria or other criteria, comprehensive plan, or the municipal code which the person testifying the decision. Failure to raise an issue accompanied by statements or evidence sufficient to afford the decision makers and the parties an opportunity to respond to an issue precludes appeal based on that issue. Some new language here, just need to make sure I understand. Persons who testify shall first receive recognition from the chair, state their full name and mailing address, and if appearing in a representative capacity, identify whom they represent. Is there a presentation by the applicant?
Yes, Brent Burton here. Can you hear me okay?
Got you loud and clear. Mr. Burton, what address should we use here for you?
Okay. P.O. Box 1938, North Plains, Oregon 97133.
Thank you. Please go ahead.
Thanks for the opportunity to present my case here. First, I know you have a lot of pages, but this case really should be quite straightforward. You indicate that this hearing would be conducted under 17.64.010. I didn't hear 1750 announced, and that was added to the consideration only on about the 15th of July with the production of the staff report. This case has been reviewed by staff 2 prior instances, during which time there was never any mention of 1750, and nobody's been noticed about 1750. And also, it should be noted that 1750 is not one of the criteria for a setback reduction. It is, however, a requirement that must be undertaken, must be complied with during the permitting process. And just to point out, my neighbor to the north has undergone that process and is now undergoing the geologic hazard assessment, which I will certainly be engaged in after I have an approval for the setback reduction. It doesn't make any sense to design a house and all the features that go along with it, only to be rejected and have to redesign a house in a different position based upon the geology. If the geology indicates some design alteration, I'm fine with that, but I don't want to have to do 2 designs in order to accomplish that. I think it makes a lot more sense to design the house and then get all the geologic surveys that need to be undertaken. Moreover, if we look at how LUBA has indication about approval of a setback reduction, they say that a disputed setback reduction does not give interveners, in this case, but it also applies to the applicant, the right to seek approval of a development permit and building permit for a dwelling that is located, in that case, 3 feet from the front line rather than 15 feet, as would be required by 17 or by municipal code without the setback reduction. In other words, we will comply with all of the building requirements, but we need not comply with codes in advance that are meant to be considered during the permitting process. Also, looking at 1750, no, sorry. So anyway, those are the points that I wanted to make about 1750. They really don't belong in the consideration for a setback reduction, particularly not noticed and not, or in other words, they're not given notice ahead of time. So as mentioned, some of the items in the setback reduction criteria were caused some concern for the Planning Commission in the March hearing. And if we start with 1764-010A2 regarding significant views of the ocean, that refers to nearby properties. And the Planning Commission at that time interpreted nearby properties as including persons that may be walking or driving on Hemlock Street. That alone is a novel idea and likely has never been employed any time in the past. But nonetheless, even if it is, the consideration is not simply whether a house blocks the view, but whether the setback reduction versus no setback reduction changes the view. And I put together a simple sketch to show that if we consider moving the house up the hill by 4 feet, that would block an additional 4 feet of the sky that has no effect whatsoever on the horizon, which is below the 100-foot elevation of the house. It was raised in the an issue was raised in the staff report that if we don't consider that, then what about looking through the space between the side yards? Well, that's been addressed also by Luba in the past. And Luba determined that the relevant question in the appeal is whether 1764-010 must be interpreted to require that the view be identical or better than it would be without the reduction. We don't think so. By any objective standard, the impact on that view can be attributed solely to the front yard setback is de minimis. In other words, it's not a problem creating a significant obstruction of the view from the street, even if one considers the street a place that that is included within the criteria. Okay, next is 1764-010A4. And the issue was the impact on, I'm sorry. Okay, according to 1764-010A4, the criteria that were mentioned, only one need be considered to allow the setback reduction request. The first one that we considered was tree protection. And that was brought up as an issue. And so what we proposed was that we would protect trees on the property by moving the overhead utility lines underground. And there's a picture there that shows the trees which are severely damaged because of the routine maintenance cutting of the trees. Now, if we get the setback reduction, those lines go underground and the trees are protected. And we would be more than willing to make that a contingency of the setback reduction. Okay, and then 1764-010A4B addresses restricted views of neighboring properties. Well, at the moment, there are no neighboring properties, but the neighbors to the north are planning to build a house there. And Jeff Taylor, one of the owners, wrote a letter indicating that, in fact, his view will be enhanced if the house is built with a setback reduction. And the reason for that is because with a setback reduction, the house would in effect be moved eastward 10 feet. That would clear his vision to the southwest with a better view of the ocean if the house is located with the setback reduction. And we pointed that out also in an architectural diagram that shows the change in view protection with the house in the setback reduction. And under the next one, among those listed criteria for which only one is necessary, is 1764-010A-4E. And the designation of the lot as an unusual configuration was disputed. However, if you consider that at least half of the lot has a slope of 30 degrees or more, it's difficult to not attribute that to be a lot that is unusual in configuration. But it becomes even more unusual if you factor in that it's a flag-shaped lot by necessity because the city has imposed a restriction on the ability to park or even to access the property from Hemlock. So we have a situation where we can't get into the lot, we can't park off of Hemlock, or even on our own property, and that requires entering the property from Center Street. And those factors clearly make this an unusual configuration. The next issue that was raised was whether or not there was enough space for public works access into the water main that is under Hemlock Street. And at the meeting, there was a diagram from GIS that shows the location of the water main that is very close, almost touching the Taylor property, and nearly so on the north side of the property that we have. And based on that, the commission was concerned that there was not enough space to allow access for repair and maintenance of the water main. So because that was a concern that needed to be addressed, I consulted Lawrence Waters, an engineer who has a long history of working in public works. And I posed the question as to how much room do we need? Well, it turns out that Mr. Waters took a look at Google Streets and saw that there was there had been a locate done on the street, and that indicated that the water main was not where GIS indicated that it was, but rather it was much further into the street than had been recognized. But rather than simply accept that, I had a locate performed by, it was ordered through PLI Engineering, and they submitted to me photos that I sent in yesterday, because they were only obtained yesterday. And they demonstrate that the water main is 10 feet from the property line, which would make it 15 feet from the from any structure that's built within the setback area. And clearly, and according to the testimony of both Mike McEwen and Lawrence waters, that's more than enough distance for Public Works to perform all of the maintenance and repair that they may need to do. And so I think that that addresses the issues and the questions that were raised at the last meeting. And I'd be happy to answer any questions. And in regard to the continuance, I think that there is enough evidence to indicate that a setback reduction is warranted. But if there is a remaining question that we need more information, I'd be glad to obtain such. However, I would like any information that I have to attain, I'm hoping would be within the listed criteria and not part of the permitting process. And thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you, Mr. Burton. Just to be clear, because this is a pretty critical piece of our consideration. Do you want a continuance, or are you saying you're okay without a continuance? Just a yes or no for a continuance, just so we know here.
Well, it can't, the continuance cannot be contingent upon some issue that is before the Planning Commission that is still in question.
You know, we can have a little bit of latitude on that, but once we close the public record, then there is no option for a continuance. So I have a few questions for you. After my questions, you may go, I don't have an answer to that. I would like a continuance, or you could go, you know what, you're full of beans and you have the record you need and I don't need a continuance. So I will allow a little latitude on when you ask for a continuance based on our conversation, testimony presented here. It will, before we close the public record, I'll ask the question again, and you can decide at that time whether you want a continuance or not. Does that sound fair?
Sure, but one of the reason I ask, of course, is because as this is now the third round, and as we go through this, I have issues, new issues thrown at me that are not part of the criteria.
Sure.
And that's why I'm asking if it can be contingent.
Up until the point that we close the record, you will have the option to decide whether you want a continuance or not. There's a lot of information here. I can't tell you what sort of conversation we're going to have after we close the record. But I can tell you, you have the option to ask for a continuance up until the point that I call the record closed. After that, legally, there is no option.
Okay, then I understand.
But again, you don't have to make up your mind right now.
Okay, so okay, if I have some latitude in making that decision,
I'll tell you when the point is. I'll tell you when we're at that point. We're not there yet. Are there questions for Mr. Burton?
Thank you.
You're welcome. Are there questions for Mr. Burton? I have a couple of questions. We're still going to go through the process of asking for any of your further specialists, if you have them here, that are in support of this. We'll ask for proponents and opponents, and then I will finish with you. But let me start with a couple of questions for you. And I offer these questions in an effort to give you some sort of insight into how I am thinking. I do not represent in these comments I'm going to make my fellow commissioners here. You may not agree with the opinion that I have, but I'm putting it out there for you to consider. And in an effort to try to give you as fair a process as possible. So just a couple things stand out for me that you heard last time and you've addressed this time. It's the idea of property not being something that has a house on it, for example, or something owned specifically by one person or family or entity. I personally view property as broader than that. I view the word property to include the beach, for example. That is the property of the citizens of the state of Oregon. I view the roads as, depending on their jurisdiction, the property of the citizens of Cannon Beach, the citizens of the state of Oregon, or, you know, even wider, the citizens of this country. So with that definition in mind, I am considering the view of property to be wider than you say you agree with. I'm not saying you have to agree with that. I'm just telling you that's my view. So if that's my view, I'm considering what the impact of your structure looks like when you bring it closer to the road and affect that view of additional property. And at the location your site is at, it is we have 1.5 million visitors into this city every year. It's a lot of people that come through here that also have, in my mind, a stake in the decision I make. So I have to consider, in my personal view, the other people that are affected by the decisions I'm a part of. Your drawing, your sketch is not enough to prove to me that the view is not affected. I'd need more. I believe there's a higher standard that you need to bring to us to prove through some of these issues that I have concern with, the one I'm speaking to now. Let me give you an example of just my common sense. I'm not a specialist here, but here's how I look at it. I don't know how well you can see me or not, but if I'm sitting here, if I'm standing on the road and I'm looking out over a view, and this is your house at a normal setback, if I bring it closer to me, not only do I lose the horizontal view, the vertical view, I also lose horizontal to an extent, maybe not as great as I do vertically, but I do lose some view there. It is something I'm considering. I'm also considering the impact of what that does to that corridor. It creates a cavern in a way, if you will. That is a view in and of itself. We may not agree on the word view there, but that is my opinion of what it does to that view or view corridor. So in my consideration of what you've presented, I'm telling you, I don't think you've presented me with enough information to satisfy that view is not affected. The geology report, you said 1750 is not considered. We've heard tonight it can be considered. The geology is very important. I'm not saying you couldn't come up with a way to design something there, but to design something there that works. But I am saying that the bar is much higher at that particular point. Other than the highway, the only point between the northern and southern parts of our city, also with some pretty critical infrastructure. You've mentioned a couple times at Taylor's. What I'm telling you entered my mind as I considered what they asked for, but it was a different set of conditions. There was a different precedent based on what they had and what they were asking for than what you have in front of you. So to satisfy, for me to feel satisfied that I'm not rendering a decision that would put critical infrastructure possibly in peril, I need a higher level of proof. I will give you an example of what that might look like. There might be a survey that's done. I'm blanking on the word, but basically it lays out where specific points are on your site, and it would lay out where the sewer line is in one document. So I can go, okay, I get it. And you could even have it to the point, not to say that you have to lay out the entire design of where a window is or anything else, but the basic foundation of where the house is in relation to where maybe a retaining wall is or a proposed retaining wall in relation to the sewer line. That is going to give me the level of confidence I need to go, you know what? Yeah, let's stretch here a little bit. There's some other circumstances with this site that I think we should consider. Short of having that level of comprehensive understanding of those variables, I'm stuck guessing. I'm stuck using this common sense that I just showed you in terms of just, well, do I think it affects the view? Yeah, I think it does. I'll give you an example of how you might, I'm trying to be, again, constructive to give you some ideas of how something might work. Lower your roof line. Take it from a gabled roof to a flat roof. Maybe it's not as tall. There's a lot of ways to address some of these concerns that we may end up talking about once the record is closed. But I want you to have an idea of the things that are important for me and possibly my fellow members as we think about this. We're often faced with requests of this type. Often we have to say no. Tonight we were able to say yes, but in each instance, and each instance is unique, we're considering a number of variables, not just what happened next door. It's different in every case. So again, I offer that some constructive thoughts for you in this process. It's not really a question, because I'm sure we don't agree on the definition of property, but just some insight in terms of what would be helpful moving forward. Does anybody else have any questions or comments?
I just want to comment, it's 1750.03. I think, hi, Mr. Burton. I'm, Mr. Bates. You had indicated that, hello, are you there?
Yes, and I was wondering if I can respond to the chair's comments.
Oh, absolutely.
Sure, absolutely. Please do.
Okay. Well, first in discussing the view, I know the diagram that I sent you was relatively rudimentary, but I think it should clearly indicate what's going on in terms of the view, because there's no benefit if you simply move the house up in terms of the view over the top of the roof line. And that's going to be the case even if we have a flat roof that's way below the maximum height. Now, the issue that you raise is looking between say another building in the side yard. Now the setback being 5 feet, that means there's going to be 10 feet between the two houses. And that's exactly the point that Luba examined in the case that I cited. I can give you the site if you like. But they determined that the change in view in that side yard is going to be de minimis. It's going to be next to nothing. It'll be somewhat different if you're walking up and down the street. You may not have any benefit looking through that side yard. But you might also consider that if you move the house 10 feet to the east, that there will be a 10-foot difference behind the house on the west side that would open up and allow you to look at the ocean in that space. So in that sense, the setback reduction would actually increase the viewing area from a street view. Now again, we mentioned the 1750 code is a requirement whether or not I have a setback reduction or not. My argument is that why do I need to have it before I get a setback reduction? If I go ahead and make detailed plans and then the setback reduction ends up being denied, then I have to start all over again and redesign where the house is going to be. And then also I'd have to come back to the city and say, well, we can't enter the property from Center Street because now the driveway is too short. And then we'd be asking to open up the driveway, let us park on Hemlock. And so in order to make everything fit together, we need to do the 1750. But I think it only makes sense to do it in the permitting process. And I can't imagine any benefit to do it before a decision is made for the setback reduction.
I just wanted to
Okay,
comment.
there was another question.
Yeah, sorry, Mr. Burton. When you look at the procedures for setbacks as related to geological hazards, it says the city may require that the requirements of this section, namely providing a geological survey in conjunction with a request for approval of a setback reduction, can be the grounds for we can move it up. We can move that requirement for a geological structure up to this process as opposed to requiring it for a building permit. The concern I have is we have just recently been exposed to another property very near yours on Hemlock there, that is very similar with the deep cut in the hillside, where our geologist said there are potential shear issues on that property. I'm suspecting that same situation may apply to you, and what I think I'm recommending is you go ahead and ask for the continuance, because we will ask and are entitled to ask for a geological report. That piece of property is very important to the city, not just in terms of the view, but for the main corridor through the city, and also for all of the water that goes to Tolovana. And if there's any slippage, wherever it is on that hillside, then we have a significant problem. And you know, my intention is to ask for that geological report, and that might help you decide whether you want to ask for a continuance.
And I know Mike's intention here. Obviously, we know there's a geology report in there. It doesn't address the specific structure, and that's concerning. That would be proposed. So yes, there's a geology report with all sorts of asterisks on it around the location of some key pieces that they just didn't have. So that's certainly specific.
Yes.
And certainly critical if we are.
Yes, that still begs the question as to, it's going to be done anyway, and it's going to be done, it has to be done, and it's usually done in the permitting phase, rather than upfront, for which I don't understand why it needs to be done upfront rather than in the permitting phase.
I'll tell you why I feel like it's necessary. I feel that it's necessary if you want to move the building that close to the utilities and to the street. We would need a lot of assurance that there will not be a geological hazard created by cutting into the hillside that close to the street and utilities. That's why I'm concerned.
Well, of course, that concern is going to be addressed no matter when the investigation is conducted.
But I think what we're saying is, Mr. Burton, I think what we're saying is, if it's not addressed now, I personally don't see how you get to the next phase.
Then what I'm hearing then is if the geologic survey or addendum, if you will, is appropriate, then are you in a position to say that if those conditions are met, that by contingency the setback reduction would be approved?
No, I have to say, I have a number of other concerns as well.
Well, see, that's why I need to know what it is I need to address in order to get this approved.
Well, I think you have the
And
findings.
so if
Well, and again, that's part of the reason for this conversation.
in other words,
part of the reason for the conversation now is to offer you our concerns, and you have one of them. You have multiple of them at this point. The geology up there is important to us. The consideration of view is important. There may be other issues that people want to bring up forward for discussion here that are either in or maybe are new to the staff report. But that's the reason for the discussion, to tell you these pieces that we are concerned about, that we do not feel have been addressed in a way that give us comfort moving forward in one of the most complex sections of our city.
And I want to be very clear that even if there are more utility concerns than just the geological, but the geological is the gateway. That is one of those concerns. I do have other concerns that are unrelated to geological.
okay, if I have a list of what those concerns are and I can address them, that would be appreciated. But I don't want to address everybody's concerns, get those satisfied, and then have a new one come up.
I'm a little bit concerned about the process here because you have had two opportunities now to put information into the record. You know the criteria. So our job now is to take what you have provided and apply the criteria. So I don't know what more we are supposed to do. It's not our job to tell you how to get this approved. Our job now is to take what you have given us and apply the criteria. You know the criteria that we are about to apply.
Okay, well, let me, if I can comment about that. This is the third time I've been to the planning commission. The first two times, the staff report indicated that all of the criteria were met. The last meeting, there was concern about the placement of the water main, and then some new issues arose, and I've addressed those, and now just a few days before this hearing, yet there's a new issue, particularly 1750 that has come up. So I feel like there's a moving target here, and I want to get all the evidence that I need to get to you, fulfill all the requirements, but it's very difficult to hit a moving target. That is a new criteria that is presented.
I don't think it's a new criteria. I think it might behoove you to hire some professionals to help you through this process.
Well, I've done that. I've had several, but their conclusions are disputed, and so I again, it's feels like a moving target. I understand that the view issue is something you want more detail about. You want the geologic hazard assessment done, but I just like to understand if there's more that needs to be addressed when I come back.
I want to be very clear that even if we were to ask for more information, we have a deliberation to do that is based on our application of these criteria to whatever you provide as evidence. There's never going to be a guarantee that you will just show us what we need and we're going to approve. So we are beholden to apply these criteria, and they may or may not point toward a setback, toward granting a setback reduction. We can never tell you exactly what you could submit to make it happen. We do have to apply these criteria as they exist.
Well, of course, I have the criteria. That's what I've been trying to do, but I'd just like to understand where or what we're missing.
Agreement, Mr. Burton.
So that I can be prepared.
We're missing agreement. You have not compelled us to believe that 1750 does not apply. You have not compelled us to believe that views are not impacted. You have not compelled us to believe we should not consider the geology. We do not have agreement. Commissioner Matusik suggested council might be able to help you compel us, but we are telling you we're not compelled by the arguments you've made, and we're ultimately at some point you have to compel us, and what you've given us, this isn't. I can't put it more simply in my view than that. I'm trying to give you areas that I need more compelling in. And after that, if we just kind of keep going back and forth over yes, no, it's not going to change. So something has to be different about the next time you talk to me about what property means. Something has to be different about what it means to submit a geology report, or what's in a geology report, or someone looking at the location of a water main on Google Maps versus a locate versus any other method. Each thing I have to agree with you on to move toward agreement with what you're asking for, and we just don't have that. So I don't think there's a point in going back and forth about these things we don't agree on. I'm telling you what they are. You can choose to let the record stand tonight with what you've provided, or you can choose to continue this conversation with council, and maybe they can compel us in a different way, or maybe you can. Maybe you'll sit back and reconsider this in light of what you've been told tonight. But I think what you're hearing is there's a lot of areas that we need a different argument and a different set of support in order for us to move forward in a way that you haven't already seen in past times. You've been here twice, you're frustrated, show something different.
Okay, no, I got it on view and 1750. And can we, at least with the new evidence that I have presented, agree that the criteria for width of access to utilities is sufficient?
No, I'm sorry, this is just not a negotiation. We have not had an opportunity to deliberate. I have concerns about 1764-4. We cannot make that kind of promise.
Yeah, the answer is an unequivocal no. The question for you, Mr. Burton, is whether you would like a continuance or you would like for us to deliberate and render a decision tonight. That's the question for you at this point.
Well, pretty clearly, I'll need a continuance based upon your comments.
Fair, okay. Mr. Burton, what we'll do at this point is we'll move ahead with this process. We'll ask for proponents, opponents, and we'll finish with you. And we have your request for a continuance noted on record, so it will be continued to the.
We can talk about that if you want.
We'll talk about what that is. Is there any additional testimony you'd like to add at this time, Mr. Burton, or shall we move on?
No, we're done.
Thank you, Mr. Burton.
At least for now.
Can I ask a clarifying question unrelated to all of the geology and stuff?
For us?
Comment for Mr. Burton.
Sure.
One of the comments that Mr. Burton that you made during your presentation was about the moving of the aerial utilities to underground. Were you referencing that as the photo that you have shows the mainline utilities? It shows the ones that run along the streets, the power and the cable and all that. Were you referencing moving those underground, or were you referencing the specific drops that go to your dwelling, your proposed dwelling, to be underground?
No, I'm talking about the lines that you see would go underground. I've spoken to contractors and some of the utilities preliminarily about doing so.
Okay, so moving.
Yeah,
So you're
so
mentioning.
of course, that would be. Yeah, it'd be the power and utility lines that are overhead. So that would actually improve the view, I think, for a lot of people. And it would also save the trees that are being damaged by maintenance cutting.
How is that related to the
And
setback?
I'm willing to. I'm willing to make that contingent upon a setback reduction.
So you're trying to negotiate for the setback reduction?
Well, I'm not sure how you want to describe it, but I'm offering to take down the utility lines to save the trees that are on the property. And without the setback reduction, I have no desire to do so.
Please understand that I would not consider that tree protection under 1764-4A.
Well, even at that, there are two additional criteria that have been met.
That's highly questionable.
Are there other questions for Mr. Burton before we move on? Thank you, Mr. Burton. Are there other presentations by anyone on your team presenting on your behalf, Mr. Burton? Okay, I'll move to proponents. Are there proponents who would like to come forward at this time? I see a hand up. I don't see a name.
Lawrence Waters.
Mr. Waters, please go ahead.
Yes, thank you. I'm here on my own dime. Mr. Burton hired me initially, but I'm here because of what I saw in the staff report and what I heard read tonight that isn't an accurate representation of what I reported on. I was asked to review whether or not there was sufficient space in the right-of-way of Hemlock for maintenance. And in the public works world, when you're talking maintenance, that means, you know, you want to maybe upgrade a water line, or you're replacing some valves, or maybe you had a slow leak you need to dig into and replace. We shouldn't be conflating that with emergency repair from a major break, or especially on the whole coastal region, which my experience is all up in the Puget Sound area, where two of the cities I work for, I dealt extensively with unstable slopes, building permits on them. I was staff support to several planning commissions, and as I also served as a public works director and city engineer. In this case, I was just being asked to comment on whether or not you could do maintenance, and I should throw the word in routine for maybe folks that don't understand that word maintenance in terms of public works. And it's really quite different than emergency repairs, responding to a catastrophic failure of the road or something like that. And I agree with you. Those are all real concerns. That's all my report was on. And I sent in an addendum to Steve. He didn't mention that he'd got that, but it just focuses on that. That's it. That is the issue with the water line, sewer line, and there's a storm line in that street, is that there is sufficient room from the right-of-way line to those lines to do routine maintenance. Anything else beyond that, then it's kind of a wild card. You can try to develop plans for how to deal with catastrophic failures of a road surface that contains those utilities, including looking at how those utilities were actually built in there. You know, are they bolted together? What are the materials? Cast iron, heavy duty plastic, whatever. I don't know if Cannon Beach has done that, but that's all I was asked to look at. And I just want to make sure the record's clear that issue of maintaining those utilities with this setback reduction still leaves plenty of room between the utilities and the right-of-way line. And then, as the staff report has said several times, if you feel you need more space, you'd have to have permission to get onto the private property to do that. And that wouldn't ever be needed really for just routine maintenance of that street. If you're out there in a major rainstorm when you're trying to do something, then the fact that you're on an unstable road, and unstable in the sense that it isn't rock. The hard clay doesn't come up to the surface. It's got material from historic landslide debris, the same material that are on the slopes of Mr. Burton's property and the Taylor property next door. You're going to have a different playbook to be running by. So that's all I was asked to look at. And I just wanted to correct the record that I wasn't saying that his moving of his house had no effect on the water line. I was saying that there is sufficient space in the right-of-way to do maintenance on those utilities, as long as you're not out there in crazy conditions, or you're not responding to an emergency, like a huge water line break, or an earthquake where things are starting to move, liquefy, whatever. So that I just wanted to point out those things. I've got experience in all of this, the geology, the I've issued permits. I was a building official in several cities and I issued permits for houses built on 54 feet deep pilings. I've been through the whole gamut, but I wasn't hired to look at that, and I'm not commenting on any of that. That's for other experts or you and Mr. Burton to work out. So any questions of me?
I don't have any questions. Just a comment. I did see, if what you're referencing you sent to Steve was your clarifications of the point you made, I did see that. So that was submitted to the planning commission.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Waters. Are there other proponents that would like to come forward at this time? Okay, are there opponents who would like to speak at this time? I do see one. Please come forward.
Karen Labonte, your friendly Public Works Director. I wrote a very lengthy staff report and gave to Steve and Robert, and they did an excellent job extrapolating that and putting it into their staff report. So you had one cohesive document. But what I want to do tonight is highlight a couple of things, and Mr. Waters just brought to your attention one of them that I wanted to make sure you knew. First of all, I just want to say I respect his experience and his knowledge, as I do Mr. McEwen's, but I want to remind the commission that Hemlock used to be Highway 101. And there is a plethora of infrastructure that is underneath that road. Gas lines, you name it. It is not like our side streets. It is a very different animal. Most of our community, the streets are not standard. The right-of-ways widths and the street widths are not standard. So this is something that Public Works has to deal with on a regular basis. So for anybody with vast experience or otherwise to say that I have sufficient room to do my maintenance when they don't work in this community, they're not familiar with this community, they haven't set foot on the location that we're talking about tonight, I think is unqualified to make that statement. I'm qualified to make this statement. Mr. McEwen was with my team for over 16 hours when we had a water force main blow the asphalt wide open on Hemlock downtown. And all of you, or most of you, saw what that entailed. That is kiddie's play compared to what's going to happen if we have a failure by Mr. Burton's house, because we have a sewer force main, a sewer gravity line, a water force main, storm, and a gas line. So I couldn't even begin to predict how catastrophic that would be if especially that sewer force main blew, because the road would be wide open. The goal in that area for Public Works is to keep one lane of traffic open. And the reason for that is the people on the west side have no access to their homes if I can't. So when there's a failure, or I'm doing routine maintenance or anything else out in Hemlock, I have to keep one lane of traffic open. That means I have to follow all OSHA regulations for my flaggers, the subcontractors, to be safe while we're doing this. That is not an easy thing to do on Hemlock. And so when you're talking about this, and if you noticed Mr. Waters' email that he sent yesterday, dated the 24th, 2:21 p.m. on page 2, he highlights, again, obvious that my report is discussing routine maintenance, like the placement of a new water line, not how to respond to catastrophic road failure or major break in water, sewer, storm line due to age, some other problem. We are in the middle of a $15 million hardening of our water infrastructure because our infrastructure is so old. It is highly unlikely that we're going to face other catastrophic situations on Hemlock. So not just Mr. Burton's property, but any property along Hemlock, I would plead with the commission to closely scrutinize any setback reductions that you get, because as Mr. Burton's neighboring property. If they get an approval, that usually leads to further discussion with me about coming out into my right of way and out into Hemlock. And then when you talk about burying power lines, I don't know if Mr. Burton has talked to Pacific Power, but that may not even be possible because there may not be room to bury those lines. And the GIS tool that we use to track our infrastructure is just that. It's a tool to show us where things are. It is not an exact. That's why we do locates. So that map was given to him as a guideline, not as an exact purpose. I heard tonight all the benefits about views, trees, traffic improvements or impediments, the beauty of the home, the placement of the home. I haven't heard anything that protects the city's right of way or infrastructure, which takes care of everybody in this town. And so as challenging as it is with his lot and all the other things that he's been very careful about trying to care for, nobody pays any attention to what we deal with every single day. And it's for the betterment of our entire community and every visitor that comes here. And to me, that should be the holy grail of any decisions that are made relative to setbacks. I live on Hemlock. I live on a corner. I had significant setbacks that I dealt with, and I never asked for any lenience on that. I don't want a sewer water line erupting and damaging my property, whether it's a set of stairs, a porch, or the side of my house. And that's why I'd say, I just don't think that we should be approving these things. So it presents a lot of liability for the city that I have no way of protecting us against. So, thank you.
Any questions? No. Thank you. Other presentations by other opponents? Okay, Mr. Burton, we will come back to you. You have the opportunity to rebut anything you've heard or make any final statements or add any additional information at this time. We have heard you say, make your request for continuance, so that will be granted. Do you have any further testimony or evidence you'd like to submit at this time?
No, I think I'd just like to ask Ms. Levante if there is a distance that would be satisfactory, or is even the standard setback not enough to have access to the water main?
We won't have a conversation this evening. We as a commission will think about what you've asked for, and in our in consideration of the process that we have to go through, that we're legislatively required to go through, we will think about what you've asked for in light of what we know you're trying to do and have a fair process for you. Anything else you'd like to add?
Thank you.
Thank you. If you're finished, we will close the public.
Nope.
Thank you, Mr. Burton. We'll close the public testimony.
Thank you.
You're welcome. And move to consideration. I think, you know, in the past, we've often had requests for continuance and really just said, let's move on, and hadn't had a whole lot of discussion.
Right.
I think in light of this process where it's been, maybe we have, if there's anything that we haven't voiced already in terms of questions or concerns, maybe we have that now. There was a question brought up that cannot be directly asked of our Public Works Director. Is there a way to get that information out there? Maybe it's just not part of something we can reasonably do. Steve, you may have comments on that.
I think it's just, do we grant it or not? I don't think we're going to pick another number, right? I mean, what's before us is a request. We are either granting or denying that request. It's not our job to say there's another alternative out there.
The one thing I would say, not necessarily, I agree with you on the other alternative portion. What I'm trying to make sure we do is not have the appearance of additional information. And I'm not making a comment on whether that has been done or hasn't been done, but we have a process laid out in front of us. we have our process. Is there anything new that's going to be a surprise? I don't like the idea of that happening, and I'm not saying it did or didn't happen, but I don't want someone to come in and go, well, you blindsided me with that. That wasn't fair.
I mean, I'm confused because to start with, we didn't bring in new information during deliberation. We applied the criteria. So I'm assuming that our deliberation would do the same. Certainly, we could have a conversation now that allowed Mr. Burton to hear our thought process, but I don't know if that's appropriate, given that there's been a request for continuation.
Well, let me throw out an idea on just the one specific point, and I'm not sure, Steve, you may need to help out with this, but there's a request for continuation. It doesn't seem, actually, Karen may have said this. I don't know what sort of coordination has happened between Mr. Burton's team and the city's team in terms of standing out there with the people that matter and going, hey, here's where we have agreement, here's where we don't. Maybe there's no agreement, I don't know, but get on the same page because we're talking different, we're being presented. Either.
It is not our job to orchestrate the applicant's process of providing evidence. I feel like we are in a very strange position here that we've never, ever done in the time that I have been here, when an applicant is asking us to tell him what evidence to provide. Carrie had a comment.
Yeah, it's good time for.
So I just have a couple of quick things. I'll respond to your question first about the degree to which the planning commission has an obligation to identify the evidence that responds to the criteria. You are absolutely right. The planning commission does not have to tell the applicant what evidence is necessary. But what the planning commission does have to do is they have to tell the applicant how they are interpreting the criteria, which I think is one of the things that the chair said with respect to how you are interpreting the term property. That is, the applicant has the right to know how you are going to interpret the criteria. And I think you've been very specific tonight about that question. I think you've offered some ideas of what that evidence might look like, but you don't have an obligation to tell the applicant what you will accept or not accept in terms of evidence. That's up to them to produce the evidence that responds to the interpretation that you have proposed. And I don't think that the planning commission is interpreting the criteria any differently than it has before. I think that Mr. Burton has just understanding it a little bit better as the conversations are continuing. And so I think that that's really good that you all are offering that. Couple of other points I want to make. The question about how much of a setback you would accept. That is a question, you're absolutely right, you do not have to answer. But there is a point where Mr. Burton will satisfy the setback and then he won't be here, right? So we couldn't say the house has to be set back 25 feet, right? We can only make it be set back as far as the setback clear and objective code requires. So that's a second point I wanted to raise. The third point I want to raise, I understand Mr. Burton has requested a continuance, and I think that's fine, but I would like for the commission to make very clear that if the commission is going to grant that continuance, it needs to come with a concurrent 60-day extension of the 120-day clock. I'd be happy to answer any other questions, but those are the things I wanted to say.
Thank you.
Concurrent 120-day clock, is that entirely on us? Can we do that?
As far as if we're going to grant a continuance.
It's a one-way conversation in terms of that timeline?
Right now, this is not the initial evidentiary hearing that a continuance needs to be granted. So therefore, if we're going to allow it and allow for 60 days for additional evidence to be submitted, I think it would be wise for us to also get the concurrence of the 120-day clock. So we're not, if this gets appealed, it's going to council with no time in the clock to act on it.
My concern is remanded to us with a specific time. Line outlined. Are we staying within what has been Are we staying with, are we moving that timeline out by going
That
ahead?
timeline was through Mr. Burton's agreement.
Right.
So
We're
he
not
could
moving
agree, he could agree again to move it out 60 days
an addition.
in additional.
Right.
We need that.
We need that for sure, if we're not coming back till August or September.
Yeah.
And that's if we're considering the continuance.
We need to open the record again and ask.
That's correct.
Okay, Mr. Burton, in order to grant your continuance thoughtfully with the timelines outlined, are you willing to it's an additional 100, it's a 120-day period total, basically, is what we're asking for.
Concur with the 120 days.
You concur with the 120-day period for this process?
Well, I think the question is, would you agree to extend the 120-day limit an additional 60 days to accommodate a continuance until September, the regular planning commission meeting in September?
Thank you, Carrie.
Yes, I agree to the additional 60 days.
Thank you, Mr. Burton. We'll close the record again. Okay.
Following Carrie's point that we should be clear about how we're thinking about things, I would say that I have definite reservations with calling this a lot with unusual configuration. From what is in the record, I would not call this unusual, given how many lots there are with 30% slopes. So, and he also bought this property knowing the limitations about access and slope. As we saw in the first evidentiary hearing, what he was calling unusual was just based on the fact that his driveway would be a little bit steeper, other than if it was 10 feet closer to 10 feet west. It wasn't as though he wasn't going to be able to access his structure. So I do not consider this an unusual configuration. So in the interest of transparency, that is something that Mr. Burton can consider when he comes back after the continuation.
Yeah, thank you, Mickey. I was going to bring that discussion point up as well, and remember the conversation around the effective slope of the driveway was kind of. So I spent some time looking, and although I don't believe there's I couldn't find any standards for driveway slope. Many of the places I found recommended a maximum angle even less than the 20 degrees that allowing the setback reduction would have achieved. So in any case, it's going to be a very steep driveway, and that being a justification for a unusual lot configuration.
Would anyone else like to add what hasn't already been discussed? Steve?
Hey, Carrie, is there anything else we're missing or any other thoughts? Just continue it at this time and move forward.
I don't have anything. I think that the commission's done a really good job of trying to provide some greater explanation of the various criteria and how you interpret them. And I think that that's been very helpful.
Okay, do we, any further discussion?
No.
We're ready to move on with a continuation? Vote on that, don't we? No, we don't.
I think we should definitely make a motion to continue, correct?
Do we need that? We need to know the date certain of the meeting in September. That I don't know.
September 26th.
September 26th, I believe.
Hold on.
Give me 1 second.
Yes.
September 26th.
Okay, may I have a motion on that, please?
I move to continue this item until the September 26th Planning Commission meeting.
For a second?
Second.
Any further discussion?
With the condition that the timeline will be extended by an additional 60 days.
Thank you, yes, okay. Second. Further conversation or consideration, conversation? Okay, Tessa, will you call the roll, please?
Commissioner Bates.
Yes.
Commissioner Matusek.
Yeah.
Commissioner Moritz.
Yes.
Commissioner Sinclair.
Yes.
Commissioner Ostrander.
Yes.
Chair Newton.
Yes, this item is continued until our September meeting. Okay, moving to the Additional items of the tree report.
Review. We had a total number of 11 trees removed, 6 were for hazard. 5 were dead, none were removed for construction. It was a required replanting of 3. And the reason being that 3 of the properties did not fall below the minimum threshold that would have required replanting.
Questions? Okay. Move to the good of the order. Is there anyone who has any items for the good of the order?
One thing, I think the housing meeting's coming up, it's on the 30th. It would be a good one to attend.
Yes.
Okay.
Fun to be there.
Yeah.
Okay, if there's nothing further, we will adjourn. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Yeah, and I appreciate everyone's ability to work those findings and